Symbolic conditioning is a deeply psychological form of manipulation that operates beneath the surface of conscious thought. It exploits the brain's natural tendency to associate meaning with symbols, objects, images, sounds, or gestures that trigger emotional or behavioral responses without us even realizing it. From the time we're children, we're conditioned to respond to symbols. A red stop sign makes us freeze, a heart shape signals love, a national flag stirs pride or fear. This conditioning builds over time, forming mental shortcuts that shape our reactions without conscious evaluation. Symbolic conditioning. But when used manipulatively, symbolic conditioning becomes a weapon. Influencers, cult leaders, and propagandists inject symbols with emotional weight, often manufactured, so that whenever you see that image, color, or phrase, your body reacts automatically. Your guard drops, your beliefs tilt, your trust is nudged. The symbol doesn't just represent something, it becomes the trigger for obedience, loyalty, or fear. A logo may start to feel like family. A uniform may instill instant authority. A hand gesture used often enough may become sacred or threatening. Over time, the repetition of symbolic associations burns a pathway in your nervous system. You don't even need a full explanation. Just the presence of the symbol is enough to spark an emotional storm. Your identity becomes entangled with these cues, and you'll defend them without knowing why. The most insidious part, the meaning of the symbol can evolve while your reaction stays the same. This makes symbolic conditioning one of the most powerful tools of influence because it doesn't argue with your mind. It hijacks your instincts. Gaslighting by omission. Gaslighting by omission is a covert form of psychological manipulation that works not through what is said, but through what is deliberately left unsaid. It's the silence between the words, the carefully withheld detail, the conveniently forgotten truth that leaves you questioning your own reality. This method is especially dangerous because it feels so subtle, so non-confrontational, that you rarely realize it's happening until the damage is done. The manipulator doesn't deny your experience outright. Instead, they leave out just enough information to make you doubt yourself. You start to feel unsure why something feels wrong, why you're confused, why your memory doesn't quite line up with their version of events. They act calm, reasonable, even kind, but the missing context, the unanswered questions, the strategic silences, they all leave you unsettled. You sense a gap, but can't fill it. Eventually, you begin to mistrust your own instincts. This technique thrives in relationships where trust is assumed. It's not the shouting or accusations that wear you down. It's the careful omission of truth. They don't mention what really happened. They leave out what was said in a different room. They omit what they did or how they felt or who they talked to. And when you confront them, they claim innocence. I never lied, they'll say. And technically, they didn't. But they starved you of the truth until you learn to second-guess yourself. Gaslighting by omission turns the mind into a foggy maze. Over time, you begin to doubt your memory, your emotions, your instincts, until the only clarity that remains is what they choose to provide. Time distortion. Time distortion is a powerful psychological technique that manipulates your perception of reality by warping your sense of time. It's not about changing the clock. It's about making you feel like time is moving faster, slower, or not at all. In the hands of a manipulator, time becomes elastic. You lose track of how long you've been waiting, how long you've been loyal, how long you've been suffering. They create environments where the boundaries of days and hours blur through endless conversations, disorienting routines, isolation, or emotional turbulence that stretches or compresses your internal sense of chronology. Imagine being kept in a room with no windows, no phones, no clocks, only the manipulator's voice to guide you. Hours feel like days, or imagine the opposite, a whirlwind romance love bombing so intense that it feels like you've known them forever in just a week. Time distortion is what makes someone fall too fast, stay too long, or forget how much has changed. When your brain can't accurately mark time, it can't accurately track manipulation. It's used in cults, high-control relationships, interrogations, and even marketing. You might think a commitment is small because it's framed in the moment, but months later, you realize you've given away your autonomy. Repetition and monotony dull your ability to notice time passing. Sudden chaos speeds it up, flooding you with sensation so you can't think. You feel stuck, but you don't know how long you've been stuck, only that you can't remember when things started to feel wrong, and that's exactly how they want it. Semantic satiation. Semantic satiation is a psychological phenomenon turned manipulation tactic, one that causes words to lose their meaning through repetition, making you more suggestible, confused, or emotionally numb. When a word is spoken again and again, quickly, monotonously, or with strategic intent, it begins to sound strange, hollow, disconnected from the concept it once represented. At first, it seems harmless, but in the hands of someone who wants control, this technique becomes devastating. It begins when key terms, love, loyalty, freedom, truth, even your own name, are repeated so often and in so many different emotional tones that they lose their weight. You're safe, they say over and over. You're safe. You're safe. But are you? Eventually, your mind stops analyzing and simply absorbs the sound, no longer questioning its accuracy. The words become vibrations rather than meanings. Manipulators exploit this to deaden resistance. They repeat slogans, labels, affirmations, and buzzwords until you stop evaluating them critically. Once those words feel emotionally empty, they can be refilled with whatever meaning the manipulator desires. Love can come to mean obedience. Freedom can mean loyalty to a doctrine. Truth can become whatever they repeat the most. It's often used in political propaganda, cult indoctrination, and abusive relationships. The words you once trusted are stripped of clarity and replaced with programmed emotion. Your language, once your tool for thinking and expressing, becomes a tool of confusion. You try to speak up, but nothing feels real. You try to define your feelings, but the words don't land. You become silent, not because you have nothing to say, but because the words no longer mean what they used to. Hypernormalization. Hypernormalization is a psychological state where the abnormal becomes so constant, so overwhelming, that it starts to feel normal. It is a method of control not by hiding chaos, but by flooding people with so much contradiction, confusion, and false stability that they give up trying to make sense of anything. It paralyzes the mind by making reality seem too complex to untangle, too contradictory to question. Over time, you stop resisting, not because you agree, but because you're exhausted. This technique thrives in that environment saturated with conflicting narratives. One day they tell you you're special, the next they remind you you're replaceable. You're praised and punished in the same breath. The rules change weekly. The explanations contradict each other, and yet everything keeps moving forward as if it all makes perfect sense. At first, you question it, then you try to adapt. Eventually, you surrender to it. Hypernormalization was born in systems where truth had lost all meaning. In totalitarian regimes, abusive households, or toxic institutions, people begin to act as if everything is fine, not because they believe it, but because pretending is easier than confronting the void. The reality becomes a performance everyone agrees to follow, because the alternative is unbearable. Manipulators use hypernormalization to wear down your resistance. They create chaos wrapped in routine. They keep you too busy, too emotionally drained, too overstimulated to see through the illusion. You begin to normalize dysfunction. You stay in the confusion. You accept the lie, not because it makes sense, but because it never stops coming. Information cascading. Information cascading is a subtle yet deeply manipulative psychological effect where individuals abandon their own knowledge, instincts, or doubts in favor of following what others appear to believe, often without ever checking the truth for themselves. It starts with one person voicing a strong opinion, then another echoes it, then another, and soon the illusion of consensus becomes stronger than any solitary truth. This technique is terrifyingly effective because humans are social creatures wired for survival in groups. When we see others agreeing on something, even if it's false, our brain interprets it as a safe bet. We start to think, if so many people believe this, it must be true, but the cascade has already begun. One voice became 5, then 50, then 1,000. No one questions where the idea started because questioning now feels like rebellion. Manipulators and propagandists use this to perfection. They plant information in just a few visible places: social media, news headlines, influencers, or trusted figures, and let the crowd do the rest. Even lies, repeated widely and confidently, gain the weight of truth. You begin to feel foolish for disagreeing. Your own logic starts to feel dangerous. You silence your doubt because doubt feels lonely, and that's the point. Information cascades don't require evidence. They require momentum. Once you're swept up in them, your critical thinking erodes. You follow the current, not because it's right, but because standing still feels too isolating. And by the time the cascade collapses, if it ever does, you may not even remember what you originally believed. Mirror exposure with distortion. Mirror exposure with distortion is a deeply invasive psychological manipulation that weaponizes your own reflection against you. It begins with something familiar, seeing yourself, but slowly, deliberately, that reflection is twisted, not through glass or image, but through subtle feedback, repeated criticism, and emotional suggestion. It's a distortion not of the physical mirror, but of the mirror in your mind. You start to see yourself the way they describe you, not as you truly are. The manipulator doesn't need to scream or insult. They use passing comments, disappointed glances, comparisons that sting. They exaggerate your flaws, downplay your strengths, and always highlight the moments where you fall short. You always overreact. You're not as kind as you think. You looked better before. At first, you brush it off. But over time, those seeds take root. You begin to monitor yourself, overanalyze, apologize for who you are. This technique is most effective when paired with isolation. Without outside mirrors, friends who affirm you, experiences that validate you, you begin to rely solely on their reflection of you, and that reflection is cracked. Suddenly, you feel ugly, weak, unworthy. You forget the sound of your own voice, the shape of your own power. You start to look in actual mirrors and see someone you don't recognize. They've made you believe that version is the truth, that their distorted lens is more accurate than your own, and the more you believe it, the more you act like it. It's no longer manipulation, it becomes identity. You stop questioning their image of you because you've forgotten how to see yourself any other way. Paradoxical intention manipulation. Paradoxical intention manipulation twists your own thoughts against you, using a powerful psychological paradox. By forcing you to focus obsessively on what you fear, what you resist, or what you wish to avoid, it increases the likelihood that you will spiral into it. This method doesn't attack you head-on. Instead, it uses your own mind as the battlefield. The manipulator subtly encourages you to confront your anxiety, your guilt, your shame, but not to heal it, to weaponize it. They might say, keep worrying about failing, maybe then you'll finally learn. Or, you're afraid of being abandoned, you should expect it every day. What begins as a disguised form of help quickly becomes a psychological trap. You start looping in your own mind. You imagine the worst outcomes so vividly, so constantly, that they feel inevitable. Your fears take center stage not as cautionary thoughts, but as forecasts. This technique is used in abusive relationships, high-pressure coaching, interrogation, and even cult programming. By encouraging you to lean into your worst-case scenarios, the manipulator deepens your dependence on them for relief. They become the only escape from the mental chaos they themselves incited. You try to stop thinking about what haunts you, but now the fear is louder, stronger, and more embedded than ever. Over time, your identity wraps around these fears. You laugh nervously at your own trauma, you expect the pain, you mock your own desires, and the manipulator stands by, supportive on the surface but silently smiling, because the more you try to fix yourself with their twisted encouragement, the more broken you become. Controlled silence. Controlled silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of power. It's the quiet that makes your skin crawl, the stillness that carries weight, the deliberate withdrawal of words to unsettle, punish, or dominate. It is the choice to say nothing when everything in you is desperate for clarity, connection, or closure, and that desperation is exactly what they want. The manipulator uses silence like a scalpel. After a conflict, they don't yell, they vanish. After vulnerability, they go cold. After you speak your truth, they give you nothing back. No nod, no answer, no comfort. You're left alone in the void of their absence, spinning in your own doubt. You replay your words, your tone, your worth over and over again. Did I say too much? Was I wrong? Why won't they respond? This technique is especially cruel because it mimics emotional neglect. It taps into the primal fear of abandonment, the ache of being unseen. Our brains are wired for connection, and when that connection is severed without explanation, it feels like psychological starvation. The silence becomes louder than any scream. Controlled silence isn't peace, it's pressure. It forces you to fill the gap, to bend, to break just to restore the sound. You apologize even when you're not wrong. You offer comfort to the one who's hurting you. You beg for scraps of their attention, not realizing they are watching, waiting, using your anxiety as leverage. In their silence, you hear your own shame echoing back, and that's exactly what they want. Echolelling. Echolabeling is a manipulation technique that turns your own words into weapons, quietly, subtly, and devastatingly. It works by capturing phrases you've said, fears you've confessed, labels you've used, and then feeding them back to you again and again until you start to believe them as absolute truths. It's not yelling, it's not shaming, it's mirroring with a twist, repetition laced with suggestion until the echo becomes your identity. You might once say in passing, "I've always been a little sensitive." Later, they refer to you as the sensitive one. You mention, "I hate feeling ignored," and suddenly every disagreement is framed as your fear of abandonment. It sounds like empathy. It looks like understanding, but it's conditioning. They're branding you with your own vocabulary, repeating your words until they no longer belong to you, but to the version of you they want to control. Over time, echolabeling narrows your sense of self. You begin to live inside the box they've built from your language. You fear contradicting it because it would mean questioning your own voice. You begin to own labels like clingy, overthinker, broken, too emotional, not because they're true, but because you've heard them so many times they feel permanent. This tactic is especially dangerous because it feels like closeness. They remember what you said, they quote you directly, but they use that memory to keep you small, to define your role, to remind you of the emotional leash you're on. What once felt like being seen becomes a form of entrapment, your voice bouncing back at you, distorted and weaponized until you forget what you truly meant the first time you spoke. Effective forecasting hijack. Effective forecasting hijack is a psychological trap that manipulates your ability to predict how you'll feel in the future. It seizes the part of your brain that plans, that dreams, that hopes, and rewires it with engineered expectations. You're made to believe that if you act a certain way, submit to a certain belief, or stay in a certain relationship, it will lead to happiness, success, or peace. But that promised emotional payoff never comes, and still, you stay because you've been taught to chase a feeling that always feels just out of reach. This technique doesn't attack your logic, it hijacks your hope. Manipulators paint vivid emotional futures. You'll regret leaving me. You'll feel safe once we move. You'll finally be happy when you finish this program. They craft futures full of imagined bliss or unbearable loss, guiding your choices not by facts, but by synthetic feelings. You begin to make decisions based on how you think you'll feel, not on how you feel right now, and when the outcome disappoints, you assume the failure is yours. Maybe I just didn't try hard enough. So you stay longer, give more, surrender deeper, chasing a future you were promised, waiting for the emotional reward you were sold. This hijack thrives in toxic relationships, coercive groups, manipulative workplaces. It cloaks your suffering in delay. You don't leave because you're convinced joy is just around the corner. You don't speak up because you've been taught that discomfort is just part of the path to peace. Meanwhile, they tighten their grip because your future has become their tool. Surveillance suggestion. Surveillance suggestion is a psychological technique designed to make you feel watched, even when you aren't. It doesn't require cameras, microphones, or tracking devices. Just the idea that someone is observing you is enough to alter your behavior, shrink your freedom, and trigger self-censorship. The manipulator doesn't need to monitor you constantly. They just need you to believe they could be. And once that belief takes root, it becomes a prison you build around yourself. It starts small, a subtle comment like, "I always know what you're up to," or "I can tell when you're hiding something." You laugh it off, but you feel a shift. You hesitate before texting someone. You look over your shoulder while browsing. You begin to imagine eyes in the walls, in your phone, in every moment you thought was private. You modify your actions, your words, even your thoughts, just in case they're listening. This technique thrives in relationships ruled by control, romantic, parental, institutional. It uses guilt and paranoia as surveillance tools. You begin to believe that breaking a rule, even a silent one, will somehow be discovered. You punish yourself before anyone else can. You confess to things they never asked about, simply to relieve the pressure. They nod, satisfied, not because they knew, but because you believe they did. Surveillance suggestion doesn't need proof. It needs your imagination. And your imagination, once turned against you, becomes a powerful tool of obedience. You shrink yourself, not from external force, but from the unbearable weight of imagined judgment. In that silence, you lose your spontaneity, your authenticity, your freedom, until eventually you don't need a cage. You become your own. Forced ideological introspection. Forced ideological introspection is a form of psychological coercion that disguises itself as personal growth. It begins with a question, not to understand you, but to unravel you. You are asked to examine your beliefs, your values, your identity over and over again under the relentless pressure of someone else's framework. It feels like self-reflection, but it's not. It's an interrogation wearing the mask of enlightenment. You're told to question everything, your upbringing, your morals, your assumptions. At first, it seems empowering, but slowly, the questioning becomes invasive, exhausting, punishing. There is no safe answer. Every response is dissected, reframed, and pushed back on until you begin to doubt your own foundation. Why do you think that? Is that belief really yours? Could it be that you've just been brainwashed by society? These aren't invitations, they're traps. The goal isn't discovery, it's surrender. You're being deconstructed, not to be rebuilt authentically, but to be rebuilt in someone else's image. The manipulator wants you raw, stripped, vulnerable, because that's when you're easiest to mold. They flood you with their doctrine, their philosophy, their truth until your own voice feels shallow and untrustworthy in comparison. It's common in high control groups, exploitative therapy dynamics, radical movements. You're led to believe that resisting means you're closed-minded, that questioning them means you're broken. You become addicted to the shame of your own imperfection, always striving to purge the wrong thoughts, the bad conditioning, never realizing that the new voice in your head no longer belongs to you. Authority mimicry. Authority mimicry is the art of impersonating power, not through lies, but through subtle cues that hijack your brain's instinct to obey. Humans are wired to defer to those who appear authoritative. Uniforms, titles, posture, tone of voice, even lighting or background can trigger unconscious submission. This technique exploits that reflex by crafting the illusion of legitimacy, just enough to make you hesitate, second-guess, and comply without question. It doesn't take a real badge to invoke obedience. It takes a suit, a clipboard, a confident tone. It doesn't require an actual expert, only someone who speaks in technical jargon with certainty. Your instincts scan for signs of hierarchy, and when they find them, your defenses lower. You become less critical, more agreeable, more likely to follow commands without realizing you've surrendered judgment. Manipulators use this in everyday life, from fake therapists and influencers to corporate bullies and cult leaders. They mimic the posture of professors, the voice of politicians, the presence of law enforcement. And when you question them, they double down on symbols, quotes, credentials, affiliations, designed not to inform, but to intimidate. What makes authority mimicry so dangerous is how easily it bypasses logic. You don't stop to ask who gave them power. You simply react as if they have it. You hesitate to interrupt. You apologize when challenged. You agree, even if it feels wrong. And they smile, not because they earned your trust, but because they wore the costume of someone who should be trusted. The performance is all they need, and once you believe the role, you obey the actor. Hypercompliance reinforcement. Hypercompliance reinforcement is a manipulation technique designed to reward obedience so intensely and punish hesitation so subtly that you become addicted to pleasing. It doesn't just train you to comply, it trains you to anticipate, to preempt, to bend before you're even asked. Over time, your worth becomes tied to how quickly and completely you say yes, until saying no feels like a betrayal, not just of them, but of yourself. It starts with praise, over-the-top approval for following rules, exaggerated gratitude for minor cooperation, affection doled out like a prize for doing exactly what they wanted, even if it wasn't good for you. It feels validating. You feel seen. You feel safe. But underneath that praise is a trap. The moment you hesitate, ask a question, or assert a boundary, the tone changes. The warmth disappears. You don't get punished loudly. You get ignored, disappointed looks, guilt-laced silence. It hurts more than any scream ever could. So you learn. You learn to stay ahead of their needs. You anticipate moods, cancel your plans, apologize first. You fold before conflict even rises. You start wearing your compliance like armor, mistaking it for love. You don't notice how your voice has gone quiet, how your desires have been shelved. You only notice the relief that comes when you get it right, when they smile again, when the silence lifts, when they approve. Hypercompliance isn't obedience, it's survival. It's the belief that peace depends on your perfection, that your safety lives in their satisfaction. And once that belief is locked in, you no longer wait to be told what to do. You tell yourself. Value reversal rituals. Value reversal rituals are deliberate psychological processes designed to flip your internal moral compass so that what once felt wrong now feels right, and what once felt safe now feels shameful. They don't do this with direct force. They do it through slow, staged rituals, repetitive acts that challenge your core beliefs, break them down, and rebuild them in someone else's image. These rituals are powerful because they don't just reprogram thought, they make you participate in your own reprogramming. At first, the rituals feel odd. You're asked to repeat ideas that conflict with your values. You may be pressured to confess things that weren't wrong or to renounce things that once gave you pride. You may be forced to praise actions that hurt others or degrade yourself in front of a group. It starts as discomfort, then it becomes routine, then it becomes truth. Manipulators use these rituals in cults, gangs, toxic organizations, and abusive relationships. They invert language, calling cruelty strength and obedience freedom. They ask for displays of loyalty that violate your ethics, small ones at first, then bigger. You hesitate, but the group watches. Your identity begins to detach from who you were and anchor to who they want you to be. Every time you perform the ritual, your internal resistance weakens. Eventually, you don't just act the part, you start to believe it. The scariest part is how quickly your sense of right and wrong can be re-engineered when wrapped in ritual, repetition, and emotional pressure. Soon, the things that once broke your heart now make you proud, and the things that once gave you joy now make you feel guilty. Cognitive overloading through jargon. Cognitive overloading through jargon is a stealthy manipulation technique that disguises dominance as expertise. It happens when someone uses complex, obscure, or specialized language to flood your mind with information you can't fully process. So you stop trying. You nod, agree, submit. Not because you understand, but because you feel too ignorant, too overwhelmed, too small to push back. It begins with an avalanche of terminology, words you've never heard, acronyms stacked on theories, stacked on buzzwords. They speak with certainty, speed, and precision, leaving you no room to breathe, let alone interrupt. Every time you pause to ask what something means, they respond with more jargon, layering confusion with condescension. You start to feel stupid for even asking. This isn't education, it's erasure. Your instincts, your doubts, your simple questions are drowned in a tidal wave of complexity. You're told that if you don't understand, it's because you're not ready, not smart enough, not evolved enough. The more they talk, the more you disconnect from your own clarity. And that's the goal, because once you doubt your ability to understand, you'll default to their authority. It's used in abusive leadership, cults, academia, corporate manipulation. Anywhere someone wants obedience disguised as enlightenment, you find yourself agreeing to plans you don't grasp, following ideologies you can't decode, supporting systems that feel wrong but sound right. Cognitive overloading numbs the mind and inflates their control. They don't want you informed, they want you dazed, because a confused mind doesn't argue, it obeys. Entrapment loop. The entrapment loop is a psychological trap designed to keep you chasing validation, resolution, or approval that never truly comes. It's the emotional equivalent of a maze with no exit. Every path feels like it might lead to clarity, but somehow loops you back to the start, more exhausted and confused than before. Manipulators use this loop to drain your will, erode your confidence, and keep you emotionally tethered to them, always hoping that this time things will be different. It often starts with a promise of change, love, truth, closure. You open up, you commit, you try harder, but just as you reach the threshold of relief, they shift the rules, raise the stakes, or twist your words. Suddenly, you're back where you began, questioning your memory, your worth, your role in the chaos. You feel like you're almost understanding them, almost fixing things, almost enough. That illusion keeps you hooked. The genius of the entrapment loop is that it uses your own empathy against you, your desire to resolve conflict, to be fair, to love unconditionally. Those instincts become leashes. Every cycle teaches you to work harder for less in return. And when you finally try to leave, they dangle closure, just close enough to make you stay one more time. With each loop, your boundaries blur. You learn to tolerate more pain, accept more confusion, and suppress your voice for the sake of keeping peace, until one day you forget what peace ever felt like. All you know is the loop and the desperate hope that maybe, if you just try a little harder, you'll finally break free. Conditional sleep deprivation. Conditional sleep deprivation is one of the most insidious forms of psychological manipulation because it masquerades as coincidence, lifestyle, or even love. Unlike total sleep deprivation, which is overt and brutal, this method withholds rest selectively, just enough to fray your emotions, dull your judgment, and erode your resistance, without you fully realizing what's happening. It doesn't need chains, it just needs to keep you tired. The manipulator creates a pattern: long emotional conversations late at night, unpredictable wake-up calls, surprise conflicts before bed, or affection that only comes during exhaustion. You're kept alert, engaged, on edge, never fully resting, never fully recovering. The next day, you're foggy, your reactions slow, your ability to think critically softens, but you blame yourself for staying up, for overthinking, for being weak, and that's exactly how the control deepens. Sleep is where we process emotion, restore mental strength, and recalibrate. Take it away, even in small doses, and your grip on reality loosens. You become more agreeable, more suggestible, more emotionally volatile. You cry more easily. You give in more quickly. You doubt yourself more deeply. The manipulator appears calm while you unravel, and they use that contrast to paint you as unstable. This method thrives in abusive relationships, high-control environments, cults, and interrogations. It's especially dangerous because it doesn't feel like abuse. It feels like bad timing, poor habits, your own fault. But it's not. It's engineered. By fragmenting your nights, they dismantle your strength by morning. Because a sleep-deprived mind doesn't fight back, it survives. And survival is exactly where they want to keep you. Belief anchoring via repetition and emotion. Belief anchoring via repetition and emotion is a manipulation technique that forges conviction by flooding your mind with emotionally charged messages until they no longer feel like opinions. They feel like truth. It doesn't matter if the belief is irrational, harmful, or false. If it's repeated often enough and delivered with emotional intensity, your brain starts treating it like reality, not because you've thought it through, but because it feels too familiar to question. It starts subtly, a phrase, a warning, an idea, spoken again and again. You can't trust them. You're nothing without me. We are the only ones who care. Each time you hear it, it's wrapped in emotion, anger, love, fear, loyalty. Your defenses go down. The words bypass logic and slip into your nervous system. Your brain starts to link the belief with survival, safety, or belonging. Over time, that connection becomes automatic. This is why propaganda works, why toxic relationships stick, why cults can make good people do terrible things. Repetition makes the belief familiar. Emotion makes it feel urgent. Together, they anchor it deep into your psyche. You may not even remember when you started believing it. You just feel it, as if it came from you. You defend it, justify it, protect it, because attacking the belief feels like attacking your own identity. And when someone challenges it, you don't get curious, you get defensive, because belief anchoring isn't about truth, it's about ownership. And once that belief is locked in with enough repetition and feeling, it becomes yours, even if it never truly was. Subliminal priming. Subliminal priming is a psychological manipulation technique that targets the unconscious, bypassing your logic and planting seeds deep inside your mind, where they can influence your behavior without you ever realizing it. It's subtle, invisible, and terrifyingly effective. The manipulator doesn't have to convince you. They just have to nudge you. A word here, an image there, a feeling you didn't know was yours. It starts with exposure, repeated symbols, colors, music, phrasing, or gestures designed to evoke a specific response: calm, fear, desire, obedience. You don't question it because you don't consciously notice it. The cues are too fast, too faint, or too familiar to register, but your brain catches them, your nervous system reacts, and suddenly you're leaning toward a decision, trusting a face, craving an idea that didn't come from you. You think you're choosing freely, but that choice was shaped by invisible hands. Priming happens in politics, marketing, media, relationships, anywhere influence is currency. A manipulator might flash a word on a screen for milliseconds. They might repeatedly use emotionally loaded language in your environment. They might play the same song during moments of vulnerability so that the sound itself becomes a leash. You begin to associate feelings with things that haven't earned them. Safety with a voice, fear with a phrase, loyalty with a scent. And once those associations are in place, they don't need to argue. They just need to trigger. Subliminal priming is the art of quiet invasion. Your defenses stay down because you never saw the enemy enter. By the time you feel the pull, it's already too late. The decision feels like yours. That's what makes it so dangerous. Control via forced confession. Control via forced confession is a psychological domination tactic that disguises itself as vulnerability, but functions as entrapment. It's not about healing or truth, it's about power. The manipulator doesn't ask you to confess for your sake. They push, pressure, and prod you into revealing your fears, mistakes, secrets, and shame so they can own pieces of you can't take back. It begins with an illusion of safety. They encourage openness, insist that honesty is the foundation of trust. At first, it feels like intimacy. You feel seen, heard, safe, but soon the confessions stop feeling voluntary. They start demanding more, pressing you to reveal deeper insecurities, darker memories, things you wouldn't share with anyone. And when you hesitate, they guilt you. Don't you trust me? Are you hiding something? We can't grow if you're not honest. The more you confess, the more power they gain. Each secret becomes a thread they can pull. Every regret becomes a weapon they can use. They don't always need to throw it in your face. Just knowing they could is enough to keep you obedient. You begin to fear their silence, their gaze, their memory of what you said at your most fragile. Eventually, you censor yourself. You avoid confrontation. You comply, not out of agreement, but because you're terrified of what might be dragged back up. Your past becomes their leash, and they pull it whenever you forget who holds your guilt. The worst part? They never give back what you gave away. You confess to be free, but instead, you are bound. Denial of agency. Denial of agency is a cruel form of psychological manipulation that strips you of the belief that you have control over your own thoughts, feelings, or actions. It's not just about controlling you, it's about making you feel like control was never yours to begin with. Over time, you begin to question whether your decisions are truly your own, or if they're flawed, irrational, or dangerous without someone else's guidance. And that's the moment they have you, not just physically, but psychologically, disarmed. It starts subtly. They correct you constantly. They doubt your memory, challenge your instincts, question your emotions. That's not what happened. You're too sensitive. You wouldn't survive without me. At first, you defend yourself, but repeated enough, these words begin to feel like facts. You hesitate before speaking. You second-guess what you know. You defer your judgment to theirs, even your smallest choices, what to wear, what to eat, who to talk to, start to feel unsafe without their approval. The manipulator frames your independence as recklessness and your boundaries as betrayal. They paint themselves as the only rational one, the only safe one, the only one who truly understands how broken you are. And if you push back, they don't punish you. They make you doubt yourself. That's the deeper cut, because once you stop trusting your own mind, your freedom becomes meaningless. Denial of agency doesn't just control behavior, it rewires identity. You become a version of yourself that's always apologizing, always seeking permission, always uncertain. And the tragedy is, you forget you were ever powerful in the first place. Contradictory directives. Contradictory directives are psychological landmines, commands or expectations that cancel each other out, trapping you in a cycle where any choice you make is the wrong one. It's the voice that says, be honest, but not too blunt. Speak up, but don't challenge me. Be independent, but don't disobey. These aren't requests. They're designed to confuse, destabilize, and dominate by forcing you into constant self-correction, self-blame, and paralysis. At first, it feels like miscommunication. You try harder to get it right. You overanalyze every word, tone, gesture, trying to strike the impossible balance. But the more you try, the more you fail, because the rules keep shifting. What pleased them yesterday offends them today. What made them smile this morning sparks silence by night. You begin to lose trust in your own judgment, because no matter what you do, it's never exactly right. This tactic keeps you mentally spinning. You second-guess every move, shrink into over-compliance, or freeze in fear of getting it wrong. You learn to apologize for things you don't understand. You begin to ask permission for choices that were once automatic. Your identity fractures under the pressure of contradictions you were never meant to resolve. Manipulators use contradictory directives to create dependency. If every decision feels like a trap, you'll start seeking their approval before acting at all. You'll ask how they want you to speak, feel, exist, until your autonomy collapses. And that's when they own you, not because you're weak, but because they built a maze with no exit and convinced you the confusion was your fault. Timebound transinduction. Timebound transinduction is a psychological manipulation technique that lures your mind into a hyper-focused, altered state, one that feels calm, hypnotic, and strangely persuasive by using repetition, rhythm, and the pressure of time. It doesn't require swinging pendulums or whispered chants. It uses something far more disarming, urgency, structure, and controlled pacing to narrow your awareness until resistance fades and compliance feels natural. It begins with a countdown, an artificial time constraint. You only have 5 minutes to decide. We're running out of time. You'll miss your chance. That urgency compresses your thinking. You don't pause to reflect, you react. You don't examine your discomfort, you override it. At the same time, the manipulator slows their speech, repeats key phrases, uses calming tones, or floods you with emotionally loaded language to guide your mental state. Your body stills, your breath sinks to their rhythm, your critical thinking begins to dim. You fall into a trance not of stillness, but of momentum. The pressure to act collides with the soothing rhythm of control, and in that tension, your walls fall. You sign the contract. You agree to the terms. You say yes to something that felt wrong just minutes earlier. And when it's over, you're left wondering why you didn't stop it, why it felt so easy to obey. Time-bound transinduction is used in manipulative sales, religious rituals, interrogations, and even intimate conversations designed to extract secrets or compliance. It exploits your natural tendency to want relief, from the ticking clock, the mental overwhelm, the need to resolve discomfort, and in that need, you surrender, thinking you chose it. Microinvalidation of thought. Microinvalidation of thought is a subtle but corrosive manipulation technique that dismantles your confidence, one quiet dismissal at a time. It's not loud, it's not cruel, it whispers, it sighs, it smiles and says, "That's not really how it works," or "You're overthinking it," or "You're being too sensitive." On the surface, it looks like conversation, but underneath, it's erasure. It begins with your opinions, gently swatted away, then your ideas, minimized or redirected, then your perceptions, your emotions, your instincts, reframed until you question your grip on reality. They never need to say you're wrong outright. They just repeatedly, subtly imply that your thoughts aren't quite valid, aren't quite logical, aren't quite worthy of serious attention. You find yourself shrinking, editing yourself, prefacing your statements with maybe this is dumb, but, or I could be wrong, but. You speak less, hesitate more, and second guess what used to be natural. They make you feel like you're constantly missing something, like everyone else sees it clearly, and you're the only one struggling to understand. It's devastating because it feels so gentle. They seem calm, rational, reasonable. That's the trap. When you react emotionally to the invalidation, they point to your reaction as proof that you're irrational. And just like that, you lose again. Microinvalidation doesn't silence you with force. It makes you silence yourself. Your thoughts feel foggy, your voice hesitant, your confidence fractured. You don't just doubt your conclusions, you doubt the right to even form them. And that is how they win, not with power, but with quiet erosion. Subversion through forced ambiguity. Subversion through forced ambiguity is a psychological control technique that clouds your reality until nothing feels certain. Not words, not rules, not relationships. It creates a world where meaning is slippery and definitions shift like sand beneath your feet. You never know where you stand, what's expected, or whether your feelings are even valid. And that uncertainty is precisely the point. When clarity dies, control begins. The manipulator never gives you straight answers. They speak in circles, contradict themselves, change the narrative as it suits them. I never said that. That's not what I meant. You misunderstood. Their tone says one thing, their words another. One day you're praised, the next you're punished for the same behavior. You crave stability, but get riddles. You crave truth, but get versions. This ambiguity forces your brain into overdrive. You analyze every sentence, every expression, every pause, desperate to decode what they really mean. But the meaning is a moving target. You never feel safe in your interpretation. You begin to mistrust your own understanding. You stop making decisions without their input. You hesitate to speak, to act, to exist without validation. In this fog, the manipulator thrives. Their power comes not from commanding you, but from making you question everything until you command yourself into silence. You cling to them for clarity, not realizing they are the ones who shattered it. And when you finally try to name the abuse, the words feel blurry, the evidence intangible, because every moment was wrapped in just enough ambiguity to make you doubt it even happened at all. Confessional surveillance. Confessional surveillance is a psychological manipulation technique that weaponizes intimacy, turning moments of trust, vulnerability, and emotional release into tools of control. It creates the illusion of a safe space, a sanctuary where you are encouraged to open up completely, to share your secrets, sins, traumas, and fears. But behind the soothing voice and concerned eyes is a mental recorder, capturing everything you say, not to help you heal, but to build a file against you. At first, it feels like connection. They listen intently, ask thoughtful questions, nod with empathy. You feel seen, safe, heard, so you tell them more and more until the floodgates break and you're pouring out every painful memory, every hidden thought, every fragile piece of yourself. You believe you're being understood, but really, you're being mapped. Confessional surveillance doesn't always come with immediate consequences. It waits. Your secrets are stored, cataloged, and kept for strategic use. Maybe they're used to shame you later, maybe to guilt you, maybe to control your decisions. Sometimes they're never mentioned again, but the power dynamic has shifted. You now live with the knowledge that someone holds the deepest parts of you in their hands. This tactic thrives in toxic relationships, cults, authoritarian systems, and manipulative therapy. It exploits the human need to unburden, to feel known, but instead of healing, it creates dependency laced with fear. You begin to censor yourself, not because you don't want to speak, but because you've already said too much, and you never know when the safe space will turn into a weapon. Moral confusion, induction. Moral confusion, induction, is a psychological manipulation that attacks the compass inside you, the part that knows right from wrong, good from evil, safe from unsafe. It doesn't shatter your values all at once. It blurs them slowly, persistently, until you're no longer sure what to believe or who you are. This technique turns your ethics into a battlefield where doubt is the only victor and the manipulator becomes your only source of guidance. It begins with contradictions. They justify cruelty as kindness. They frame control as protection. They punish truth-telling as disloyalty. They wrap selfishness in righteousness and twist compassion into weakness. You're made to feel guilty for questioning them. You're told that your instincts are selfish, your anger is immoral, your boundaries are harmful. Slowly, the things you once stood for begin to feel wrong. You start apologizing for your values. The manipulator uses complex moral dilemmas, manipulative hypotheticals, and exaggerated consequences to push you into a state of helpless introspection. What if you're the one hurting people? What if leaving means abandoning those who need you? What if what feels right is actually dangerous? You begin to spiral. You want to be good, but the definition of good keeps changing. In this fog of moral distortion, they step in with clarity, their clarity. They offer you a new moral code, one that always benefits them, one where they are always the victim or savior. You adopt it, not because you're convinced, but because you're exhausted from questioning. When your inner compass spins in chaos, the hand that stills it owns you. Fabricated backstories. Fabricated backstories are one of the most deceptive and emotionally disarming manipulation techniques because they don't attack you directly. Instead, they rewrite the past to justify control in the present. The manipulator creates a story, sometimes heroic, sometimes tragic, sometimes both, that is carefully constructed to evoke your sympathy, admiration, or guilt. And once you believe the story, you begin to excuse the behavior that would otherwise set off every alarm in your body. They tell you about the betrayal that left them broken, the mentor who manipulated them, the partner who abused their trust, the childhood that scarred them. The details are vivid, the pain feels raw, and you feel honored that they're opening up to you. But this isn't vulnerability, it's strategy. The story is designed to explain away red flags, why they lash out, why they isolate you, why they test your loyalty, your patience, your boundaries. I've just been through so much, they whisper, and suddenly you're the one apologizing for their cruelty. You start walking on eggshells, not because they asked, but because their story made you feel like they've already survived enough. The more you internalize their past, the more you rearrange your present to protect them. You justify what hurts you. You absorb the burden of their healing. You believe the myth that your love can fix what the world broke. But what if the story isn't even true? What if it's exaggerated, twisted, or entirely fabricated? By the time that question arises, it's often too late, because you're already deep in a narrative that never belonged to you. And that false history becomes the cage you never saw being built. Enforced homogeneity. Enforced homogeneity is a psychological manipulation technique that erases individuality and replaces it with a single manufactured identity, one that serves the collective image dictated by the manipulator. It doesn't ask you to belong, it demands you become indistinguishable. It's not unity, it's erasure. The uniqueness that once made you feel alive is slowly stripped away until sameness feels like safety and difference feels like danger. It begins with unspoken pressure. Everyone dresses the same, talks the same, laughs at the same jokes, believes the same things, and when you don't, when you stand out even a little, you feel the burn of exclusion, a look, a silence, a withdrawal. It's enough to make you adjust. Not because you're convinced, but because being different suddenly feels like being wrong. You start to shapeshift. You quiet your voice, soften your edges, censor your thoughts before they ever leave your lips. Over time, you forget which opinions were yours and which were borrowed. You forget what you love because you've been taught to only love what's accepted. The manipulator, whether a leader, a partner, or a group, doesn't need to punish you directly. The group will do it for them, and that's the brilliance of the trap. It polices itself. Individuality becomes rebellion, expression becomes threat, and soon you're not just complying, you're defending the sameness. You mock the outliers. You become a gatekeeper for the very system that consumed you. Because when everyone looks the same, no one has to feel alone. But that belonging is conditional, and it costs you everything you once were. Toxic altruism pressure. Toxic altruism pressure is a manipulation technique that disguises control as compassion, weaponizing your empathy against you. It traps you in a cycle where being good means self-sacrifice, where setting boundaries makes you feel cruel, and where your value is measured by how much you're willing to abandon yourself for others, especially for the manipulator. It starts with praise. You're called selfless, nurturing, dependable. You're admired for how much you give, how much you care, how much you endure. And at first, it feels noble. You want to help. You want to be kind. But soon, your kindness becomes expected. The moment you hesitate, when you say, "I need time," or "this feels unfair," the tone changes. You're told you're not trying hard enough, that you're being selfish, that after everything they've done, this is how you repay them. Suddenly, compassion becomes currency. You're guilted into saying yes when you want to say no. You begin to feel shame for choosing yourself. You justify their demands by reminding yourself of their pain, their needs, their past. Your identity as a good person is now bound to how willing you are to suffer for someone else's comfort. The manipulator thrives on this. They never ask directly. They imply, nudge, hint, letting your own conscience punish you more effectively than they ever could. You become your own jailer, believing that martyrdom is morality. And slowly, you stop asking what you need, because being loved now depends on how much you can disappear. Scripted emotional outbursts. Scripted emotional outbursts are not true eruptions of feeling. They're performances designed to hijack your emotions, destabilize your perception, and manipulate your behavior. They strike with precision at moments when you're most vulnerable, confused, or trying to speak your truth. The tears, the rage, the dramatic withdrawal. It looks like raw emotion, but it's calculated. It's not about release. It's about control. The manipulator chooses their moments carefully. You bring up a concern, they explode. You ask a boundary, they sob. You express pain, they storm out, slam doors, collapse into silence. Suddenly, the focus isn't your experience, it's theirs. Your nervous system is yanked out of clarity and into panic. You feel responsible, guilty, cruel for having said anything at all. You backpedal, apologize, comfort them. It works because humans are wired to respond to distress. We want to soothe, to repair, to de-escalate, but they know this. That's why the outbursts are timed, not when they're actually hurt, but when they feel control slipping. Their display floods the room. It overwhelms your logic. Their emotions become the center of gravity, and you're pulled in without even realizing it. Over time, you stop bringing things up. You walk on eggshells, trying to avoid triggering another scene. You mistake volatility for vulnerability. You confuse chaos with passion, and without noticing, your voice disappears. Because every time you try to use it, you're drowned out by the sound of someone else's pain, a sound that might not be real, but still has the power to silence you. Obligation traps. Obligation traps are psychological snares disguised as generosity, connection, or duty, designed to make you feel indebted, even when you never agreed to the deal. The manipulator gives, helps, supports, but with invisible strings attached. It seems kind, it seems thoughtful, But the moment you try to say no, stand up for yourself, or walk away, those strings tighten. After everything I've done for you, it starts subtly, a favor you didn't ask for, a gift that comes with a lingering stare, unsolicited advice that you're expected to follow. They set the trap by doing things that seem selfless, but are actually transactions waiting for a future payoff. You thank them, you feel grateful, you assume it's unconditional until it isn't. The pressure creeps in quietly. You begin to feel guilty for setting boundaries. You start doing things out of fear of being called ungrateful, selfish, disloyal. You tell yourself they've invested in you, supported you, stood by you, and maybe they have. But that help wasn't free, it was bait. Obligation traps twist your sense of loyalty. You become trapped in a cycle of repayment for debts you never chose to owe. Your freedom becomes a betrayal. Your needs become an inconvenience. The more you try to reclaim yourself, the more they remind you of the past, the things they did for you, the times they showed up, the sacrifices they made. But love doesn't keep score. Real generosity doesn't hold receipts. When someone gives in order to control, it's not kindness, it's leverage, and you are not required to repay chains with gratitude. Reactive devaluation. Reactive devaluation is a psychological manipulation that poisons your ideas the moment they no longer serve the manipulator. It's the subtle but ruthless act of devaluing something, not because it changed, but because you said it. It's when your opinions are valid until you have them, when your worth, your suggestions, your truth lose value the instant they stop aligning with their agenda. At first, your ideas might be praised, celebrated even. You feel empowered, respected, seen. But the moment you challenge them, disagree, or speak with independence, everything shifts. Suddenly, your insights are dramatic. Your logic is flawed. Your solutions don't make sense. The very same suggestion, if spoken by someone else, or even repeated later by the manipulator, will be treated as brilliant. But from your mouth, it's dismissed. This manipulation breaks more than confidence. It breaks trust in your own thinking. You start to question your intelligence, your memory, your judgment. You wonder why your ideas always seem wrong. You begin to stay quiet in rooms where you once felt brave, not because you've lost your voice, but because you've been taught it has no value. Reactive devaluation thrives in narcissistic relationships, controlling workplaces, and gaslighting dynamics. It's not just disagreement, it's erasure. It conditions you to associate self-expression with rejection. And the more it happens, the less you fight it. Eventually, you stop offering ideas altogether, not because you ran out of thoughts, but because you've been trained to believe your thoughts don't matter unless someone else claims them first. Weaponized nostalgia. Weaponized nostalgia is a manipulation technique that turns your warmest memories into cold chains. It doesn't try to control you through fear or threat. It controls you through longing. The manipulator reaches into your past, finds the moments that meant everything to you, and uses them to keep you tied to something that no longer exists. They don't argue, they reminisce. It used to be so good. Remember when we laughed like that every night? We were happiest back then. These phrases seem innocent, even sweet, but beneath them is a message. Stay, stay because of what we were, even if what we are is breaking you. The power of nostalgia lies in emotion. It paints the past in golden light, softens the edges, edits out the pain, and the manipulator knows exactly how to guide the narrative. They'll reference your first date, the early days of the friendship, the promises made when everything still felt magical. You start to second-guess yourself. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe you can get back to that place. Maybe you're just being too harsh. But the trap isn't in the memory. It's in the illusion. Weaponized nostalgia keeps you chasing a version of the past that no longer exists, or maybe never did. It makes you sacrifice your present peace for the ghost of old joy. It turns your own heart into a leash, pulling you back every time you try to walk away. They don't need to convince you they've changed. They just need to convince you that what you had was too beautiful to lose, even if it's already gone. Overwhelm via micro-directives. Overwhelm via micro-directives is a manipulation technique that doesn't break you with a single demand. It buries you under thousands of tiny ones. It's the slow suffocation of your autonomy through a flood of constant, nitpicking instructions that appear harmless on their own, but collectively steal your energy, time, and sense of control. It's not tyranny with a fist. It's control masked as help, advice, or just being thorough. The manipulator doesn't scream orders. They drip feed them. Put that here. Don't say it like that. Next time, check with me first. You should really fold it this way. Each one feels minor, easy to comply with, not worth a fight, but they never stop. Every movement, every choice, every habit becomes subject to their correction. You become hyper-aware, always anticipating the next adjustment, always trying to do it exactly right, and still falling short. What makes this technique so dangerous is that it wears down your sense of self without you noticing. You start to forget how you used to do things, how you used to think, what you actually prefer. Your behavior shifts, not because you chose to change, but because you're constantly being course-corrected. You move through your day like you're walking through tripwires, never relaxed, never free. The manipulator maintains control without looking controlling. To outsiders, they seem detail-oriented, maybe a little perfectionist, but inside, you're drowning. You're exhausted by the mental load of meeting unspoken expectations, and eventually you stop thinking for yourself, not because you're weak, but because it's the only way to avoid the next wave of corrections. Guilt flipping is a psychological manipulation tactic that turns your pain into their weapon. It's the emotional judo move where, no matter what they do to hurt you, you end up feeling like the one who's done something wrong. You express your feelings, try to set a boundary, speak your truth, and suddenly you're the villain. You're selfish, you're unfair, you're ungrateful. It begins when you finally build the courage to speak up. You say, "That really hurt me," or "I feel ignored," or "I need space." And instead of accountability, you get a wounded look, a sarcastic laugh, a cold silence, or worse, a story about how you caused them pain. They twist the narrative so smoothly, it almost sounds reasonable. You start second-guessing your emotions. Was I too harsh? Did I misread things? Am I the one who needs to apologize? Guilt flipping is designed to scramble your moral compass. You enter the conversation needing resolution and leave carrying shame. They'll remind you of everything they've done for you, accuse you of overreacting, or spin their harmful behavior into a misunderstood gesture of love. And, the worst part, they often do it with just enough sincerity that you start to believe them. This technique keeps you emotionally trapped. Every time you try to assert your needs, they hand you a mirror of blame. You stop raising concerns, not because things are better, but because speaking up feels like betrayal. Guilt flipping doesn't silence you with force. It convinces you that silence is the only way to keep the peace, and that peace is your responsibility alone. Crisis manufacturing is a manipulation tactic that fabricates chaos to create control. It's the deliberate invention, exaggeration, or orchestration of emergencies, real or imagined, to keep you distracted, dependent, and emotionally hijacked. In a manufactured crisis, everything feels urgent. Your nervous system is on high alert. You don't have time to think, to rest, to question. You're too busy surviving, and that's exactly how they tighten their grip. It begins with sudden panic. A relationship is falling apart. A job is on the line. Someone is out to get us. You're accused of betrayal, disloyalty, selfishness, out of nowhere. Or they spiral into a meltdown, demanding your immediate emotional labor. The timing is always strategic. Right when you begin to regain your strength, speak up, or ask for space, the storm hits. You jump into action, trying to fix it, soothe it, save it. Your adrenaline spikes, your focus narrows, you abandon your needs because theirs seems so much bigger. But the crisis isn't organic, it's engineered, created not to resolve, but to consume, to keep you on edge, to keep them at the center. In these loops, you're made to believe you're the only one who can stabilize things. You become emotionally addicted to the chaos, confusing urgency with importance, confusion with intimacy, and when the dust settles, nothing has changed except your exhaustion. They don't need to chain you, they just need to keep lighting fires, so you never notice the door was open the entire time. Because a mind in crisis doesn't ask why, it only asks what next. Token resistance. Token resistance is a subtle and deeply manipulative tactic that creates the illusion of fairness, autonomy, or challenge, while ultimately leading you exactly where the manipulator wants you to go. It's not about genuine disagreement or boundaries. It's a performance, a strategic moment of pushback designed to make you feel like your choices are being respected, your voice is being heard, your agency is intact, even as it's quietly being erased. The manipulator says no, just long enough to make the yes feel earned. They pretend to hesitate, to weigh, to question. I don't think that's a good idea, they might say. Let me think about it. But they already know how the story ends. Their resistance isn't meant to stop you. It's meant to delay you, to confuse you, to build emotional suspense. And when they finally give in, you feel grateful, relieved, even guilty for having asked. This tactic is used to gain emotional leverage. By creating the illusion of difficulty or reluctance, the manipulator paints themselves as thoughtful, generous, or noble. You begin to see their eventual compliance as a gift, rather than a basic negotiation. They turn your needs into burdens, their agreement into sacrifice, and slowly you begin to shrink your ass. In relationships, it shows up as the partner who always gives in after resistance, only to remind you later of the favor they did. In workplaces, it looks like management reluctantly approving something they never truly considered denying. It's control dressed as compromise. And once you start thanking someone for letting you have what was already yours, you're no longer free. Manipulated reciprocity. Manipulated reciprocity is the exploitation of one of our most deeply ingrained human instincts, the need to return a favor. It twists generosity into a weapon, kindness into obligation. The manipulator gives you something, not out of care, but calculation, a gift, a compliment, a favor, a sacrifice, and then they wait, because they know you'll feel compelled to give something back, even if what they ask for is far greater, far deeper, far more damaging than what they ever gave you. It starts innocently. They help you when you're struggling. They praise you when you're insecure. They go out of their way, making sure you see it, feel it, remember it. You feel grateful. You trust them more. You begin to believe they're selfless, that they're different. But the moment you say no, or assert a boundary, or act independently, the debt is collected. After everything I've done for you, you owe me this. I was there when no one else was. You feel guilty, ungrateful, trapped. You give in, not because you want to, but because saying no feels like betrayal. And that's the trap. You've been conditioned to confuse repayment with loyalty and loyalty with surrender. Manipulated reciprocity is especially dangerous because it masquerades as love. It hides behind the mask of care. But it's not about giving, it's about keeping score. And once you're in their debt, even emotionally, they'll keep pulling until you're drained. Not just of favors, but of autonomy, confidence, and the right to walk away without feeling like a villain. Weaponized forgiveness. Weaponized forgiveness is a manipulation tactic that disguises cruelty as grace. It's when someone claims to forgive you, not to heal, not to reconnect, but to control, shame, and maintain power. It wraps itself in softness, in spiritual language, in moral high ground, but underneath is a sharpened edge that cuts deeper than blame ever could. It begins when you make a mistake, or maybe when they decide you have. You apologize, you take responsibility, you show vulnerability, and instead of meeting you with empathy, they grant you forgiveness, like a throne bestowing mercy. But there's a catch. Their forgiveness becomes a contract, one that can be revoked, one that you must now earn over and over again. They remind you of what you did, not always harshly, sometimes with a sigh, a pause, a quiet, "Remember when?" They say they've let it go, but they never stop referencing it. Your past becomes a leash they tug whenever you try to reclaim your voice. You're told you should be grateful for their patience, their generosity, their strength in keeping you around, but it doesn't feel like love, it feels like debt. In some cases, they forgive you for things you never did. They invent sins so they can play the role of the benevolent martyr. And once you accept that framing, you're trapped in a narrative where they're always the one rising above, and you're always the one falling short. Weaponized forgiveness is not about resolution. It's about rewriting the power dynamic. It silences protest, rewrites memory, and makes submission feel like redemption. But redemption should never feel like chains. Simulation of consensus. Simulation of consensus is a manipulation technique that makes you believe everyone agrees, even when no one actually does. It creates the illusion that the majority supports a specific idea, belief, or behavior, pressuring you to conform, not because you've been convinced, but because you don't want to be the only one who disagrees. It's not persuasion through truth. It's control through isolation. The manipulator plants agreement in the room. They surround themselves with loyal voices, nodding faces, echoed phrases. You enter a space where dissent feels dangerous, or, at the very least, foolish. You hear the same opinion repeated by different people, the same praise, the same condemnation. Whether it's a friend group, a workplace, or a cult, consensus becomes the air you breathe, and when you inhale it long enough, you stop questioning whether it's real. You begin to silence your thoughts, even in your own head. You assume you're wrong, out of touch, overreacting, because if everyone sees it one way and you see it another, then clearly the flaw must be in you. This is how the manipulator wins, not by proving their version of reality, but by making you feel alone in yours. What's terrifying is how easily this illusion is built. A few loud voices, a few planted opinions, a little repetition, and your certainty starts to erode. You nod just to survive. You smile to belong. And eventually, you adopt the belief, not because you were persuaded, but because you were surrounded. In the simulation of consensus, truth doesn't matter. Perception is the weapon. And when you fear being the only one who sees through the lie, you begin to live inside it. Stochastic approval. Stochastic approval is a manipulation technique that hooks your nervous system through unpredictability, rewarding your behavior at random intervals to keep you chasing validation like a gambler pulling a lever. It's not consistent praise. It's not steady affection. It's the emotional lottery. Sometimes you win, most times you don't, and that very uncertainty is what keeps you addicted. At first, they shower you with warmth, a smile, a compliment, a touch, a "you're amazing." It feels electric. You glow under their attention, but then it disappears without warning. You do the same things, say the same words, offer the same love, but this time, nothing. Coldness, indifference, silence. And just when you're about to pull away, the warmth returns, random, unexpected, intoxicating. Your brain lights up. Relief floods your body. You think, this must mean I'm doing it right. So you try harder. You become hyper-aware of their moods, their language, their tone. You tweak your behavior, shrink your needs, lose yourself in the pursuit of their next moment of approval. It's not love you're addicted to. It's the anticipation of it. This system is devastating because it mimics how addiction is formed. Inconsistent rewards train the brain more powerfully than predictable ones. You don't know what will trigger their affection, so you try everything, again and again, until your entire emotional state depends on their next response. Stochastic approval doesn't teach you how to be loved, it teaches you how to earn relief. And in that process, it conditions you to believe that peace, safety, and worth must always be chased, never simply received. Purity spiral reinforcement. Purity spiral reinforcement is a psychological manipulation that pushes people toward ever-tightening standards of morality, loyalty, or belief until perfection becomes a prison and deviation becomes betrayal. It begins as a shared value, something noble, something everyone agrees on, but soon the standard sharpens, the rules multiply, the tolerance shrinks, and anyone not fully aligned, anyone who questions, hesitates, or humanly falls short, is shamed, exiled, or accused of corruption. The manipulator doesn't have to enforce these rules directly. The group does it for them. Each person tries to outpure the next, not out of integrity, but out of fear. Fear of being called out, of being cast out, of not being enough. You watch others fall. You watch them get labeled, attacked, erased. You take note. You clean up your language. You post the right things. You erase nuance from your thoughts. You stop asking questions. At first, it feels righteous, like progress, but soon it feels like walking a wire above a pit of shame. The purity spiral feeds on insecurity and performance. And the scariest part? It never ends. The standards keep shifting, inching tighter, until even the most devout are found guilty. It doesn't matter how much you've given, only what you haven't yet surrendered. In this spiral, vulnerability is dangerous, forgiveness is weakness, and redemption is nearly impossible. You start to live in surveillance of yourself, of others, because one wrong move could destroy your belonging. Purity becomes survival, and the more you strive for it, the more you disappear beneath the mask of perfect belief until you no longer recognize the human underneath. Anchoring identity to doctrine. Anchoring identity to doctrine is a psychological manipulation that fuses who you are with what you believe until questioning the belief feels like betraying yourself. It doesn't just convince you to follow an ideology. It makes that ideology your identity. You're no longer someone who thinks a certain way. You are someone who is that belief. And once that bond is formed, they don't have to control your behavior. You'll police it yourself. It begins with praise, belonging, and recognition. You're one of us. You really get it. You're the kind of person who sees the truth. It feels empowering, validating. You start to feel like this worldview gives your life shape, purpose, clarity. You're not just believing, you're becoming. And the more you internalize the doctrine, the more it defines your worth. The more you feel like questioning it means losing not just a perspective, but your place, your people, yourself. The manipulator doesn't need to argue facts. They don't need to be right. They just need to convince you that being good means being loyal to the belief, that to doubt is to regress, that to evolve is to betray. Your critical thinking softens, not out of fear, but out of love. You protect the doctrine like you'd protect your own name, your own family. This tactic is used in cults, extremist groups, rigid institutions, even in relationships where personal philosophies are treated as sacred vows. It rewrites your identity around an external script, and once that script becomes who you are, unlearning it feels like death. So you hold on, not because it's true, but because letting go would mean losing yourself. Forced binary thinking. Forced binary thinking is a psychological manipulation that shatters complexity and replaces it with extremes. It's the demand that you choose, yes or no, for or against, loyal or disloyal, good or evil, leaving no room for nuance, uncertainty, or individuality. The manipulator builds a world where gray doesn't exist, where middle ground is betrayal, where hesitation is guilt, and the more you try to explain, to reason, to bring perspective, they twist it into proof that you're on the wrong side. It starts subtly. They ask a loaded question. So do you trust me or not? Are you with us or them? Do you believe in the cause or are you part of the problem? Your silence is used against you. Your complexity is framed as weakness. You begin to feel trapped in a false choice. Pick a side or lose everything. And when survival or love is on the line, you'll pick a side, even if it's not the one your soul agrees with. This technique is a fast track to control. It polarizes thought. It creates enemies out of friends and obedience out of fear. It's used in toxic relationships, cults, ideological movements, and manipulative institutions. Once you've been locked into a binary, your behavior becomes easier to predict, your resistance easier to label, your voice easier to silence. And the longer you live in black and white, the more color feels suspicious. You forget how to say maybe. You stop trusting uncertainty. You lose your ability to stand in the middle and still feel whole. Because when the only choices you're given are extremes, the first thing that dies is your freedom to think. Terror management, exploitation. Terror management. Exploitation is a psychological manipulation that hijacks your fear of death, insignificance, and oblivion to make you submit. It doesn't threaten you directly. It awakens the deep primal terror buried in your subconscious, the fear that your life doesn't matter, that you'll vanish without purpose, that everything you are could be meaningless. And then, just as that fear rises to the surface, they offer you an escape. Not safety, but salvation. Not truth, but certainty. It starts with subtle reminders of mortality, news of collapse, talk of enemies, warnings about disease, damnation, climate, culture, sin. You're told the world is broken, dangerous, doomed, and in that fear, your defenses begin to fall. Your need for comfort, belonging, and control intensifies. The manipulator steps in with the answer, their ideology, their mission, their structure. They offer you a way to transcend death, not physically, but symbolically. Join us and your life will have meaning. Believe this and you'll be remembered. Follow me and you'll be saved. You start obeying, not because you agree, but because the fear of not belonging, of being wrong, of being alone in the face of death is unbearable. You adopt their values because they promise permanence. You surrender your autonomy because they promise immortality of the soul, of the legacy, of the group. They don't need to control your day. They control your afterlife. Terror management, exploitation doesn't just manipulate your behavior. It manipulates your existence. It offers identity in exchange for obedience, purpose in exchange for surrender. And once you believe your life only matters through them, they own you, not just in this world, but in whatever comes after. Emotional shock conditioning. Emotional shock conditioning is a psychological manipulation that wires your nervous system to associate unpredictability with fear, control, and helplessness. It's not the pain that breaks you, it's the whiplash, the warm embrace followed by a cold withdrawal, the praise followed by sudden rage, the laughter that turns into screaming without warning. Your body begins to brace itself even when things seem calm, especially when things seem calm. This technique conditions you the way electric fences train animals. Random painful shocks, emotional explosions, outbursts, threats teach you not to cross certain lines, even if you're never told where the lines are. You stop asking questions. You stop asserting yourself. You learn to read moods like survival maps. Your world becomes smaller. You move through it on eggshells, unsure what will set them off next. The manipulator may tell you it's your fault, that they wouldn't react this way if you didn't provoke them. So you try to be better. You adjust, shrink, over-apologize. You try harder to keep the peace, but peace was never the goal. Control was. Over time, your body begins to live in anticipation of the next emotional strike. You become hypervigilant, anxious, numb. The love they offer feels like a drug, so soothing, so euphoric, because the pain is so deep. And that's the trick. The relief becomes addictive. You chase their approval, not because you trust them, but because the absence of chaos feels like safety. But it's not safety. It's trauma wearing a familiar face, and every shock you survive buries you deeper in a system designed to keep you afraid and obedient. Narrative reframing loops. Narrative reframing loops are a manipulative technique that slowly replaces your reality with a story, their story, until you begin to doubt your memories, your motives, even your emotions. It's not done through brute force or loud correction. It's subtle, persistent rewriting, a slow erosion of what actually happened, replaced with what should have happened, according to them. You find yourself stuck in a loop where every version of truth eventually bends to fit their narrative. It begins with small corrections. That's not what I said. You misunderstood. You're remembering it wrong. Then they retell the moment. Only now you're cast as irrational, ungrateful, too sensitive. Over time, they do this again and again, reinterpreting your reactions, dismissing your feelings, giving context that repositions them as the victim or hero and you as the confused one. At first, you push back, but they're confident, calm. They seem so sure. So eventually, you begin to wonder if they're right. You revisit arguments in your mind, trying to piece together what happened. But every time you bring it up again, they revise the story further. We've talked about this already. You're twisting it again. Why can't you let it go? And soon, the truth isn't just lost. It feels dangerous to hold on to. These loops are especially dangerous because they trap you in a state of emotional gaslighting. Even when you remember the pain, the shame makes you question it. Even when your gut screams that something was wrong, the version they repeat drowns it out. Their story becomes the only one that can be safely told, and your silence becomes the only way to survive the rewrite. Punishment disguised as discipline. Punishment disguised as discipline is a psychological tactic that cloaks cruelty in the illusion of care. It doesn't scream, it teaches. It doesn't strike, it corrects. And that's what makes it so hard to recognize, because the pain is wrapped in the language of love, of responsibility, of what's best for you. The manipulator doesn't appear abusive. They appear invested, reasonable, parental. But what they're really doing is punishing you for feeling, for resisting, for existing outside their control. It starts with a mistake, real or imagined. You forget something, you speak too freely, you ask for space. And then comes the lesson. You're given the silent treatment, extra tasks, withheld affection. You're told to reflect, to calm down, to prove you've learned. It feels like justice, like consequence. But deep down, you know it's something else. It's disproportionate. It's laced with resentment. It's designed not to teach you, but to break you. You begin to walk yourself into discipline, hoping to avoid something worse. You apologize first. You take the blame. You internalize the belief that every conflict is your failure to behave, to learn, to grow. You think they're helping you, that this pain is the cost of becoming better. But the better version of you they're shaping is quieter, smaller, afraid to speak. This tactic is everywhere. In toxic families, relationships, institutions, it's socially acceptable, even praised, because it mimics structure. But it's not structure, it's submission. And once you accept their punishment as love, they never have to raise their voice to make you kneel. Boundary testing. Boundary testing is a manipulation tactic that disguises violation as curiosity, affection, or accidental missteps until your lines blur and your no longer means anything. It's not a single breach, but a slow, deliberate erosion. The manipulator pushes just a little further each time, a personal question, a guilt-tripped favor, a touch you didn't expect, a demand disguised as a joke. You say it made you uncomfortable, and they laugh. Relax. Don't be so sensitive. It was just a joke. At first, it seems small, too small to confront, but that's the trap, because they're not trying to leap over your boundaries. They're trying to train you, to stretch what you'll tolerate, inch by inch. Every time you let something slide to avoid conflict, they learn. Every time you justify your discomfort, they win ground. You think, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I should let this one go. And so you do. Over time, your body tenses, but your voice stays quiet. You feel a quiet dissonance, a sting of unease that builds each time your boundaries are dismissed. You begin to doubt your right to say no. You start to shrink, adjust, perform, trying to manage their reactions rather than honor your own limits. They label your discomfort as a flaw, and the more they challenge your boundaries, the more you feel like you're the problem. Boundary testing isn't about getting closer. It's about gaining control. It rewires your instincts so that what once felt wrong begins to feel inevitable. And by the time you realize how far you've been pushed, your sense of what's normal has already been rewritten. Thought-terminating cliches. Thought-terminating cliches are linguistic traps, short, snappy phrases designed to shut down questioning, emotion, and critical thinking in an instant. They sound wise, they sound true, but their purpose isn't to offer clarity. It's to stop the conversation before it threatens the power structure. These phrases act like psychological stop signs. The moment you start to think too deeply, feel too much, or challenge the narrative, one is dropped like a hammer. It is what it is. Everything happens for a reason. Don't overthink it. You feel the jolt. You pause. You retract. The discomfort remains, but the path to understanding is blocked. And that's the point. The manipulator wants obedience without dialogue, peace without truth, control without resistance. These cliches provide just enough familiarity and emotional weight to feel like answers, when in fact, they are evasions. They are used in relationships to dismiss your pain. You're being too sensitive. In politics, to silence dissent. If you don't like it, leave. In religion, business, families, anywhere hierarchy hides behind virtue. Over time, you begin to use them on yourself. You shut down your own thoughts. You stop asking why, because you've been trained to accept because that's just how it is. And every time a cliche is dropped, something dies. A question, a truth, a piece of your voice. You're told you're overreacting, overanalyzing, overcomplicating, but you're not. You're reaching for meaning in a place that punishes depth, because once your thoughts are tamed by a phrase, your power is tamed with them. Gaslighting via shared mythology. Gaslighting via shared mythology is a sophisticated and deeply disorienting manipulation that distorts your reality by rewriting it through the lens of a collective fantasy. It uses the power of group stories, cultural ideals, spiritual beliefs, or invented histories to invalidate your experience. You're not just told you're wrong, you're told your truth threatens the sacred story. And that makes you feel not just mistaken, but disloyal, broken, even dangerous. The manipulator anchors your identity to a myth. Our family has always been close. This community is built on love. We're chosen. We don't hurt our own. It sounds noble, inspirational, but when your lived experience doesn't match the story, when you do feel hurt, excluded, betrayed, they don't address the harm. They double down on the myth. That's not how we are. You must be misinterpreting. This is all in your head. You're made to feel like your suffering is a betrayal of something bigger, like speaking your truth makes you the enemy of the group, the tradition, the mission. The manipulator hides behind the mythology, using it as armor against accountability. You start to question not just your feelings, but your memory, your role, your worth. And if others buy into the myth, you're isolated. You cry for help, and they repeat the same story. They would never do that. You must be confused. You know how much they love you. Slowly, you begin to wonder if the pain you feel is a defect in you. Because if everyone else believes the myth and you don't, maybe the problem isn't the story. Maybe it's you, and that's how they win. Over-identification conditioning. Over-identification conditioning is a manipulative, psychological technique that merges your identity so deeply with a role, belief, relationship, or group that you forget where you end and it begins. It doesn't ask you to join something. It teaches you to become it. And once you do, disagreement feels like betrayal. Departure feels like death. The more you fuse your worth into this identity, the easier you are to control. It starts with praise for how well you fit. You're the perfect partner, the ideal believer, the most loyal team member. You're told you're special, not just in the system, but of it. At first, it feels empowering. You belong. You matter. But soon, that identity becomes a leash. You begin to filter every decision, every doubt, every desire through the question, what would someone like me do? And if your answer deviates, guilt sets in. The manipulator reinforces this bond constantly. They reward your conformity, spotlight your alignment, and shame anything that signals independence. You become afraid to think for yourself, not because you fear rejection, but because your sense of self has been built inside the walls of their structure. To question it is to risk unraveling everything you believe you are. This conditioning is common in cults, abusive relationships, ideological groups, even toxic family systems. It doesn't control your actions. It rewrites your identity. You don't need to be told what to do. You feel what to do because anything outside the role you've been trained to live feels wrong, foreign, dangerous. And that's the cruel brilliance of it. Once they've taught you who to be, you become the one who keeps yourself in line. Manufactured contrarianism. Manufactured contrarianism is a manipulation tactic that masquerades as independent thinking while quietly destabilizing truth, trust, and unity. It doesn't question ideas to seek clarity. It questions them to sow doubt. The manipulator takes the opposing stance, not because they believe it, but because they know opposition weakens your confidence. Their goal isn't to debate, it's to disorient. It starts subtly. You express a feeling, a belief, a fact, and they challenge it every time. Are you sure? I don't see it that way. I think you're missing the bigger picture. At first, it feels like discussion, but soon it's constant, predictable. No matter what position you take, they push back, and not because they care about the issue, but because they want you off balance. They want you to explain, to defend, to stumble. They want you chasing justification while they stay cool and distant. This technique drains you. You begin to anticipate resistance in every conversation. You overthink your words. You hold back what matters, fearing it'll be met with a smirk or a lecture. Over time, you start to believe that maybe you are too emotional, too idealistic, too naive, because they always seem to know better, see deeper, stay above it all. Manufactured contrarianism isolates you, not by silencing you outright, but by making expression feel exhausting. It disguises control as intelligence, superiority as insight, and once you internalize that your voice will always be met with resistance, you stop using it, not because you lack conviction, but because you've been trained to expect rejection disguised as dialogue. Language re-engineering. Language re-engineering is a potent manipulation tactic that doesn't just control what you say, it rewrites how you think. It reshapes reality by subtly altering the words you're allowed to use, the terms you're trained to avoid, and the definitions that are fed to you until your internal dialogue is no longer your own. It's not censorship through silence. It's censorship through vocabulary, turning your native tongue into a weapon turned inward. The manipulator introduces new language slowly, wrapped in righteousness or intelligence. Old words are labeled outdated, offensive, disloyal. New phrases are introduced with emotional weight and social pressure. You're not angry, you're being reactive. You're not mistreated, you're misunderstanding. Conflict becomes growth. Obedience becomes alignment. What was once clear becomes murky. You stop naming your pain because the language no longer exists to describe it. This re-engineering can feel empowering at first. You're being taught how to communicate better, how to elevate your mindset, how to speak truth. But over time, you realize the truth is shrinking. Your language becomes full of borrowed phrases, rehearsed lines, euphemisms that numb emotion and paralyze dissent. You no longer express, you recite. You no longer question, you self-correct. When language changes, thought changes. Your ability to rebel dies in your throat before the words can form. The manipulator doesn't have to silence you. They simply teach you a new dialect, one that removes your ability to name the abuse, to cry out, to say no in a way that still feels valid. And once they own your language, they no longer need to explain the rules. You speak them into being yourself. Exclusivity enchantment. Exclusivity enchantment is a manipulation tactic that seduces you with the promise of being chosen, specially chosen. It lures you in by making you feel like you're part of something rare, something sacred, something others will never fully understand or access. The world is full of noise and chaos, but this is different. You're not just accepted, you're elevated, and that sense of privilege becomes the leash. It starts with flattery wrapped in mystery. You get it. Not everyone is ready for this. We don't offer this to just anyone. Whether it's a relationship, a belief system, a movement, or a secret group, the message is the same. You're special because you were chosen to see behind the curtain. That rush of belonging feels intoxicating. Finally, you're part of something that matters, something others aren't worthy of. But with exclusivity comes pressure. Now you have to earn your place. You have to protect the sanctity of the space. You have to prove you deserve to stay. Questioning becomes betrayal. Doubt becomes weakness. Outsiders become enemies. You start to see the world as us versus them. You, the enlightened few, and them, the misguided masses. The manipulator controls you not with fear, but with pride. And that pride becomes isolation. You distance yourself from those who don't understand. You cut ties with those who question your new path. And slowly, your identity becomes fused with the thing you were lucky to be part of. The price for inclusion isn't paid up front. It's paid in your silence, your loyalty, and eventually your ability to leave. Because once you believe you found something no one else ever will, how could you walk away? Apathy, induction through overexposure. Apathy, induction through overexposure is a chilling manipulation tactic that doesn't silence you with fear. It numbs you with fatigue. It floods your senses, your mind, and your emotional capacity with so much repetition, so much intensity, so much chaos, that you eventually shut down, not because you don't care, but because you can't care anymore. You reach a breaking point where feeling becomes too exhausting, and not feeling becomes the only way to survive. It starts with relentless emotional overload, constant drama, frequent crises, repeated arguments, an endless stream of manipulation masked as normal. Every day feels like a new battle. You're always reacting, always adjusting, always trying to stay afloat. At first, you're on high alert. Then you're just tired. Your nervous system gets overstimulated. Your empathy dries up, and slowly, indifference creeps in, not as a choice, but as a defense. The manipulator knows exactly what they're doing. They desensitize you to their abuse by making it routine. What once shocked you now barely registers. The lies, the gaslighting, the disrespect, it used to hurt. Now it just feels familiar. And because it never stops, your threshold for wrongness rises. You stop noticing the red flags. You stop responding to the pain. You stop fighting, not because you agree, but because apathy is safer than hope. This tactic is used in toxic relationships, propaganda systems, dysfunctional households. It doesn't erase your emotions. It buries them under a pile of noise. and by the time you realize you've stopped caring, you're already living in a reality where nothing changes, not because it can't, but because you've been too worn down to believe it could. Compliance through confusion. Compliance through confusion is a psychological manipulation technique that overwhelms your mind until surrender feels like the only way out. It doesn't demand obedience. It disorients you into giving it. The manipulator uses contradiction, chaos, and mental overload to destabilize your sense of logic, making resistance impossible, not through force, but through sheer exhaustion. It begins with inconsistent rules, mixed messages, and shifting expectations. One moment you're praised for speaking up, the next you're punished for it. You're told to trust your instincts, then mocked when you do. You ask a question, and the answer changes depending on their mood. You try to adapt, but there's no pattern, no solid ground. Every attempt to understand only tangles you further. Your brain, desperate for clarity, keeps trying to decode the chaos, but there is no key because the confusion is intentional. It keeps you in a heightened state of cognitive stress, eroding your confidence and ability to make decisions. You begin to question your memory, your logic, your sanity, and just when the confusion peaks, they offer relief, a suggestion, an instruction, a demand. You follow it, not because it makes sense, but because it ends the mental storm. Finally, something feels still. Over time, you stop asking questions. You stop thinking critically. You comply, not because you've agreed, but because resistance has become too confusing, too risky, too painful. The manipulator doesn't need to be right. They just need to keep you disoriented. Because in confusion, clarity becomes currency, and they're the only one offering it. Moral disengagement, conditioning. Moral disengagement conditioning is a psychological manipulation that severs the connection between your actions and your conscience. It doesn't force you to become cruel. It trains you to feel nothing when you are. Bit by bit, it rewrites your internal code of right and wrong until empathy becomes optional, accountability feels irrelevant, and the line between harm and righteousness vanishes beneath the weight of justification. It begins with small shifts. You're asked to do something that feels off, just a little. You hesitate, but they reassure you. It's necessary. They deserved it. You're just following orders. You do it. You feel a flicker of guilt, but then you're praised, rewarded, elevated. And that guilt, it starts to feel foolish, weak. You learn to override it. The manipulator feeds you narratives that erase the humanity of others. Targets become outsiders, traitors, problems. Victims become exaggerated, dismissed, or blamed. The harm is always minimized. The responsibility always diluted. Everyone's doing it. It's for the greater good. It's not like you had a choice. And just like that, your morality becomes negotiable. This conditioning thrives in cults, institutions, ideological movements, and abusive systems. It doesn't ask you to stop being good. It simply redefines what good is. And when you finally see the damage, it's not just horror you feel. It's disbelief that you ever stopped feeling at all. By disconnecting morality from action, the manipulator doesn't just gain your obedience, they gain your complicity. And when you no longer flinch at doing harm, you've become the tool they always intended you to be. Creating dependency through infantilization. Creating dependency through infantilization is a manipulation tactic that slowly convinces you that you're incapable, fragile, or too inexperienced to trust your own judgment, so you come to rely on them for everything. It's not about caring for you, it's about controlling you through constant reminders that you need help, that you're not ready, that without them, you'd fall apart. It begins with small gestures dressed as love. They step in to handle decisions. They correct how you speak. They question your choices for your own good. They insist you let them take care of things, not because you can't, but because it's easier this way. It feels kind at first, nurturing, safe, but over time, the message becomes louder. You are not equipped to manage your life. They reward dependence and punish autonomy. You try to assert yourself, and suddenly they're hurt, distant, angry. You make your own decision, and they mock you, remind you of past mistakes, subtly highlight your failures. You begin to shrink. You second-guess every move. You wait for their input before acting, afraid that making your own choice will lead to chaos, or worse, their withdrawal. Infantilization keeps you emotionally arrested. You stop growing because you're never allowed to try. You lose confidence in your voice because it's always being corrected. Eventually, you internalize the belief that without them, you wouldn't survive, and that belief becomes the cage. You don't stay because you're weak. You stay because they've made you believe you'll never be strong enough to leave. Incremental indoctrination. Incremental indoctrination is a manipulation strategy that doesn't break you all at once. It reshapes you slowly, step by step, until the person you were becomes a distant memory. It begins with small, almost invisible shifts, a new phrase, a new rule, a new belief, spoken softly. Nothing too extreme at first, just enough to make you tilt your head and listen, just enough to make you consider. That's all they need. Consideration is the gateway. The manipulator doesn't push, they drip. Little truths wrapped in lies, little lies wrapped in comfort. They use repetition, emotion, and community to make each new belief feel familiar, safe, right. Every step deeper makes the next one easier. You're not forced, you're led. Each time you accept something slightly off, it rewires your sense of normal, and by the time you question it, your foundation has already shifted beneath you. What's terrifying is how natural it feels, like growth, like clarity. You don't realize you're being reshaped because you're praised for your evolution. You're told you're becoming more enlightened, more disciplined, more awakened. Dissent is framed as regression. Questioning is treated like betrayal, and you slowly silence your own doubts because each doubt feels like a threat to your new identity. This process thrives in toxic belief systems, cults, high-control relationships, and ideological movements. It's not indoctrination with force, it's transformation through seduction. You're not chained, you're convinced, and that's why it works so well, because one day you wake up defending ideas you once feared, rejecting people you once loved, and forgetting you were ever someone else at all. Identity fragmentation. Identity fragmentation is a powerful manipulation tactic that dismantles who you are, not in one sweeping blow, but in slow, precise fractures. It targets your sense of self, pulling it apart piece by piece until you no longer recognize your thoughts, your boundaries, or your worth. The manipulator doesn't just attack you, they divide you from within until your own reflection feels unfamiliar. It begins subtly. They question your choices, mock your contradictions, highlight your inconsistencies. You're so different now. That's not who you were yesterday. You keep changing your mind. Do you even know who you are? At first, it stings. Then it starts to confuse you. You begin to compartmentalize. One version of you for them, another for your friends, another you barely understand. You don't know which voice in your head is your own anymore. They pit your parts against each other, your logic against your emotion, your values against your survival, your independence against your need for love. You're made to feel like your pain invalidates your strength. Your confidence cancels your vulnerability. The more you try to hold all of it together, the more exhausted you become. And in that exhaustion, they offer you a shortcut. Just be who they need you to be. You start discarding the pieces they reject. You abandon dreams, change opinions, rewrite your past. You become malleable, easier to control, easier to please. But in doing so, you lose the thread of who you were. Identity fragmentation doesn't silence you. It turns you into noise. And the longer you live divided, the harder it becomes to remember that once you were whole. Emotional bandwidth flooding. Emotional bandwidth flooding is a psychological manipulation tactic that overwhelms your capacity to feel, think, and respond with clarity. It doesn't attack you with logic. It drowns you in emotion. Too many feelings, too many demands, too many crises happening all at once. The goal isn't just to exhaust you, it's to short-circuit your emotional processing until you can't tell what matters, what's real, or how to protect yourself. It begins with chaos, rapid emotional swings, sudden accusations, love bombing, guilt trips, dramatic confessions, impossible expectations. The manipulator floods your system with so many emotional stimuli, pain, hope, joy, fear, confusion, that you become paralyzed. There's no space to think, no time to breathe. You can't reflect, only react. You start losing track of your own feelings. Are you angry, relieved, grateful, ashamed? You're too flooded to know. You start to focus only on stabilizing the moment, keeping the peace, meeting the next emotional need. Your own needs disappear beneath the urgency of theirs, and as the emotional waves keep crashing, your instincts shut down. You stop defending yourself. You start managing them. This tactic is most common in abusive relationships and high-control environments where the manipulator needs you disoriented but compliant. By overwhelming your emotional bandwidth, they ensure you don't ask questions, draw lines, or see the bigger picture. You're always feeling, never thinking, always reacting, never resisting. You live in a storm of someone else's emotions until one day you forget you were ever supposed to feel your own. Punitive silence. Punitive silence is a chilling manipulation tactic that uses withdrawal, not words, as punishment. It's not peaceful. It's not about space. It's about power. The manipulator withholds communication, affection, or acknowledgement, creating a void so loud it suffocates. You're not yelled at, you're erased. And in that erasure, you begin to unravel. It starts after conflict, discomfort, or simply a moment when you step out of line. Suddenly, they go cold. They stop responding. Eye contact vanishes. Messages are ignored. You're left in emotional limbo, desperate for resolution, for reassurance, for anything that tells you you're still seen. The silence is not absence. It's deliberate. It forces you to sit with shame, confusion, and fear without guidance, without closure. Over time, you start interpreting silence as threat. You associate love with its sudden removal, so you rush to fix it. You apologize first, even if you don't know what you did. You soften your truth. You shrink your needs just to bring back the warmth. And each time you do, you reinforce their control. They learn that silence gets results, that your fear of abandonment is a lever they can pull without ever raising their voice. Punitive silence erodes your confidence. You begin to believe you're too needy, too emotional, too difficult to love. But the truth is, they've trained you to equate stillness with danger. You crave their voice not just for connection, but for survival. Because when they go quiet, the silence screams, and it tells you everything you were too afraid to say out loud. Doctrine over evidence. Doctrine over evidence programming is a manipulation technique that conditions you to value belief over reality, to accept what you're told, even when it directly contradicts what you see, feel, or know. It doesn't just ask you to ignore facts, it punishes you for recognizing them. It rewires your thinking so that doctrine becomes truth, and truth becomes dangerous. You're not taught to think, you're taught to believe, and believe harder when the evidence says otherwise. It starts with a trusted message, a principle, a story, a leader, something that feels larger than life, morally righteous, emotionally compelling. You accept it because it brings comfort, clarity, purpose. But then comes the test. Something doesn't add up. The actions don't match the words. The truth breaks under pressure. You question it, but they don't give you answers. They give you shame. You lack faith. You've been influenced. You're not ready to understand. So you swallow the doubt. You learn to override your observations. You reinterpret evidence to fit the belief, rather than adjusting belief to fit the evidence. You begin to mistrust your own senses, instincts, and logic. The doctrine becomes sacred, unchallengeable, not because it's true, but because questioning it makes you the problem. This programming thrives in cults, authoritarian systems, toxic ideologies, and manipulative relationships. The more contradictions you witness, the harder you cling to the belief, because admitting the truth would mean admitting how long you've been deceived, and that pain feels too unbearable, so you double down, you silence your doubt, and you call it loyalty. But what it really is surrender. Insinuated consequences. Insinuated consequences are a subtle but deeply coercive manipulation tactic where threats are never spoken, only implied. The manipulator doesn't tell you what will happen if you disobey, disagree, or pull away. They let the tension speak for them. A pause, a glance, a vague, just be careful, a story about what happened to someone else who did what you're thinking of doing. It's not a warning, it's a trap wrapped in suggestion. At first, it feels like concern. I'd hate to see you make a mistake. It's your choice, but they don't forbid. You're free to do what you want. But the moment you consider it, the energy shifts. They get colder, distant. Something you said seems to disappoint them. Something you did makes them rethink things. You try to confront it and they act surprised. I never said that. You're overthinking, but your body knows better. You felt the line you weren't supposed to cross. Insinuated consequences are powerful because they create anxiety without a clear source. You can't fight what hasn't been said. You can't call out a threat that doesn't exist on paper. So you begin to regulate yourself. You stop bringing up hard truths. You avoid conflict before it starts. You shrink not because you're forced to, but because you've been trained to anticipate punishment that hides just beneath the surface. This tactic turns fear into fog, and in that fog, you surrender, not to avoid pain, but to avoid the possibility of pain. And that possibility is enough to keep you exactly where they want you, quiet, compliant, and always second-guessing. Blame-shifting loops. Blame-shifting loops are psychological traps designed to keep you endlessly spinning in self-doubt, guilt, and confusion. It's the cycle where no matter what goes wrong, the finger always points at you, not with outright accusations every time, but with subtle implications, twisted facts, and emotional manipulations that make you feel like the problem, even when you're the one being hurt. It's not just blame, it's engineered self-blame. The manipulator never takes full responsibility. If they explode in anger, it's because you provoked them. If they lie, it's because you weren't ready for the truth. If they withdraw, it's because you're too needy. Their wrongdoing always has a reason, and that reason is you. You begin to internalize the script. You start apologizing just to keep the peace. You analyze every word, every look, wondering what you did to cause it this time. What makes the loop unbreakable is that the more you try to fix things, the deeper you sink. They reward your guilt with temporary affection, then use it as proof that you were at fault. They reinterpret your boundaries as selfishness, your pain as overreaction. And when you finally reach your breaking point, they play the victim. I can never do anything right. Suddenly, you're the one comforting them for the pain they caused you. This loop keeps you emotionally imprisoned. You stop asking whether they're being fair. You only ask how you can be better. The truth becomes irrelevant. Accountability disappears, and you become so busy carrying the blame that you forget who handed it to you in the first place. Nonverbal authority cues. Nonverbal authority cues are a powerful manipulation technique that assert dominance, control, and superiority without a single word being spoken. They bypass logic and speak directly to the body, yours. These cues use posture, eye contact, spatial control, tone, and micro-expressions to create an atmosphere where questioning feels wrong and obedience feels automatic. You don't know why you're submitting. you just feel like you should. It begins with presence. They stand too close and you instinctively shrink. They hold eye contact just long enough to make you feel exposed. They enter a room and take the most commanding seat without asking. They use silence as punctuation, movement as pressure, and stillness as a threat. They don't yell. They don't have to. Their body says, I'm in control. Every raised eyebrow, every strategic pause, every calculated smile works like a trigger. Your heart races. You correct your posture. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You explain yourself even when you haven't been accused. These cues don't rely on facts or reason. They hijack ancient patterns in your nervous system, instincts hardwired for survival. The pack follows the one who signals dominance. The child yields to the parent's glare. The employee stays silent under the boss's stare. Manipulators master these cues. They use them to establish unspoken hierarchies, to silence dissent without confrontation, to make you feel inferior without proof. You find yourself complying before you've even decided to. And that's the cruelty of it. You weren't convinced. You were conditioned, not by what they said, but by what their presence told your body to believe. Faux scarcity creation. Faux scarcity creation is a psychological manipulation tactic that fabricates urgency and lack to trigger panic, pressure, and compliance. It makes you believe that time is running out, that opportunities are slipping through your fingers, that love, acceptance, or safety is limited, and if you don't act now, you'll lose everything. It doesn't rely on logic. It hijacks your survival instinct, and in that urgency, you stop evaluating and start obeying. The manipulator sets the stage. This is your last chance. People like you don't get many opportunities like this. I can't promise I'll feel the same tomorrow. The message is always the same. You are at risk of losing something precious, something they control. Whether it's affection, inclusion, freedom, or future success, the threat of loss looms over every interaction. It feels real. It floods your body with anxiety. You say yes to things you're not ready for. You agree to terms that feel wrong. You stay in places where you know you're being harmed because you've been convinced that what you have is rare and what's out there is worse. That if you leave, you'll regret it forever. This tactic thrives in manipulative relationships, cults, high-pressure sales, and toxic workplaces. It conditions you to accept less than you deserve, to lower your standards, to move fast without clarity. And once you're inside the trap, the scarcity deepens, the choice is narrow, the clock ticks louder. But the tragedy is, it was never real. The lack was fabricated, the pressure was staged, and your freedom was never truly gone. You were just convinced it was. Imposed consistency pressure. Imposed consistency pressure is a manipulation technique that weaponizes your natural desire to appear stable, logical, and trustworthy. It traps you in past words, outdated beliefs, and old decisions, using your own integrity as a leash. It doesn't demand you stay the same. It shames you if you change. And in doing so, it holds you hostage to who you once were. It begins when the manipulator encourages you to declare your position. Just be honest. What do you really think? Are you sure that's how you feel? They want you to commit, because once you do, they'll never let you forget it. The moment you evolve, soften, or grow, they pounce. But you said, that's not what you believed last week. You're being fake. You feel cornered, not because your change is wrong, but because it's being treated like betrayal. They turn your personal evolution into evidence of hypocrisy. They confuse growth with inconsistency. They make you feel that being true to yourself now means invalidating who you were then. And because humans fear looking unstable, you freeze. You silence your doubts. You cling to old beliefs just to avoid their disapproval. Over time, your inner world becomes rigid. You stop exploring new ideas. You rehearse your past instead of rewriting it. You act in ways that no longer reflect who you are, just to seem consistent. And in doing so, you shrink. Imposed consistency pressure doesn't demand obedience through fear. It demands it through shame, because when change becomes disloyalty, the safest thing to be is stuck. Peer surveillance pressure. Peer surveillance pressure is a manipulation technique that turns the people around you into invisible enforcers, watchful eyes that keep you in line, not through direct punishment, but through social fear. It's not about one person controlling you from above. It's about everyone around you silently reminding you what not to say, what not to think, and who not to become. The control doesn't come from behind a curtain. It comes from the circle you live inside. It begins with subtle cues. Someone is criticized for asking the wrong question. Another is praised for conforming. Someone else disappears quietly after expressing doubt. You take note. You adjust. You smile when you want to scream. You agree when you want to rebel, because you're no longer just afraid of authority. You're afraid of your peers, of the judgment, the shunning, the whispered consequences of stepping out of line. The manipulator doesn't need to watch you. You're already being watched. The group does the work for them, rewarding obedience, punishing difference, isolating those who show too much independence. And as that pressure builds, you start to self-police. You rehearse your words. You censor your thoughts. You become part of the machine that controls you, even as you suffer beneath it. This tactic is common in cults, high-control organizations, political movements, and even tight-knit social groups. It makes dissent feel like betrayal, not just of a system but of a community. And when belonging is the currency, silence becomes the cost. You don't stay because you believe. You stay because speaking up means losing everything, even the people standing right beside you. Shame-based compliance. Shame-based compliance is a brutal form of manipulation that doesn't force you to obey. It makes you feel like you deserve to. It doesn't use threats or violence. It uses humiliation, guilt, and self-loathing to turn your no into a whispered okay. Over time, you stop resisting, not because you've been convinced, but because you've been broken inward. It starts with subtle jabs at your character. You always make things difficult. You're so selfish sometimes. I guess you only care about yourself. They don't scream. They don't need to. A disappointed look, a heavy sigh, a sarcastic tone. The message lands hard. You are the problem. And if you want peace, love, or approval, you'll have to earn it. You begin to carry the weight of every conflict, even the ones they started. You over-apologize, overcorrect, try too hard to be good enough. You say yes when you want to say no. You keep quiet when your heart is screaming, because somewhere along the way, they've made you believe that having needs, emotions, or opinions makes you difficult. And if you make things difficult, you don't deserve kindness. The genius of shame-based compliance is that it teaches you to punish yourself. You become your own enforcer. You censor your voice. You abandon your boundaries. You shrink your worth, and they never have to lift a finger. This isn't respect. It's submission dressed in self-doubt, and the longer it lasts, the more you confuse your obedience with growth, when in reality, it's just your shame doing all the work for them. Hostile dependency cycles. Hostile dependency cycles are psychological traps that tether you to someone who simultaneously harms you and convinces you that you need them. It's not just abuse, it's addiction to the abuser. You rely on them emotionally, financially, or psychologically, even though they're the source of your suffering. You know they're hurting you, and yet leaving feels impossible, because in this cycle, love is fused with fear, and comfort is laced with control. It begins with unmet needs. You feel lonely, uncertain, insecure, and they offer relief. They become your lifeline. But soon, that comfort turns sharp. They withdraw affection. They create instability. They sabotage your confidence. You try harder, give more, twist yourself into someone more acceptable. And when you break, when you cry, when you collapse, they show up just enough to pull you back in. You mistake the rescue for love, not realizing they created the fall. Over time, The pain and the relief become indistinguishable. You crave their approval like air. You fear their absence like death. And the more dependent you become, the more hostile they grow. They remind you how broken you'd be without them, how no one else would tolerate you, how much they've done for you despite your flaws. And you believe it because they've isolated you, eroded your strength, and fed you just enough to keep you starving. This cycle is brutal because it wears your reality thin. You forget what safety feels like. You mistake survival for love, and by the time you recognize the abuse, the hook is buried so deep it feels like part of you, not because you chose it, but because you were taught that pain was the price of staying connected. Bystander role assignment. Bystander role assignment is a psychological manipulation that strips you of agency by casting you as an observer in your own life. It doesn't silence you by force. It convinces you that speaking up, acting out, or interfering isn't your role. You're made to feel like the outsider, even in situations that affect you deeply. Your job, according to them, is to watch, endure, and stay quiet. It begins with subtle messages. This doesn't concern you. Don't make it worse. Stay out of it. Whether it's a family dynamic, a toxic relationship, a group hierarchy, or an abusive environment, the manipulator frames you as someone without authority, someone who shouldn't act. You're told you're too emotional, too naive, too inexperienced to understand what's really going on. And when you do try to step forward, you're punished with isolation, ridicule, or dismissal. You start to doubt your instincts, to question whether your discomfort is even valid. Over time, you begin to internalize the script. You convince yourself it's not your place to interfere, even when you see harm. You wait for someone else to speak. You rationalize silence as wisdom. And when pain shows up, your reflex isn't to resist. It's to retreat, to observe, to survive from the sidelines. Bystander role assignment doesn't just suppress action. It breaks your belief that you deserve to act. It carves out a false version of you, compliant, passive, irrelevant. And the longer you stay in that role, the more real it feels, until even when the chains fall away, you still don't move, because you were taught that movement, for you, is not allowed. Denial of privacy. Denial of privacy is a psychological manipulation that slowly steals your inner world, your thoughts, your space, your right to be unseen, until you begin to feel exposed even when you're alone. It's not always violent or loud. Often, it's wrapped in concern, in curiosity, in just wanting to be close. But the truth is simpler. They don't want closeness. They want access, total access. It starts with small intrusions, reading your messages, listening in on calls, walking in unannounced, asking deeply personal questions, and reacting with anger or silence if you don't answer. They claim they're protecting you, or that if you have nothing to hide, there should be nothing to fear. But deep down, you feel the invasion. You feel the shrinking of your internal world. Over time, your privacy stops feeling like a right. It starts to feel like rebellion. You hesitate before journaling. You flinch when your phone buzzes. You share less with friends, censor your thoughts, tiptoe in your own mind. You live in constant awareness that someone is always watching. Even when they're not there, their presence lingers like a shadow. You become your own monitor, your own censor, your own jailer. This tactic is used in controlling relationships, authoritarian households, cults, and surveillance-heavy environments. It creates obedience through exposure, because when you no longer feel safe thinking privately, they don't need to guess what you'll say or do. They've already invaded the place where your resistance was born and replaced it with fear. And that fear isn't just about being watched. It's about knowing that nothing, not even your mind, truly belongs to you anymore. Overt subjective rewriting. Overt subjective rewriting is a manipulation technique that blatantly rewrites the emotional meaning of your experiences right in front of you and demands that you accept their version as truth. It doesn't just deny what happened, it redefines how you should feel about it. You're not just told your memory is wrong, you're told your reaction is wrong, your pain is wrong, your entire emotional reality is flawed. It begins when you express something vulnerable. That hurt me. I felt ignored. I was scared. And instead of empathy, you're met with a correction. That wasn't hurtful, it was a joke. You're just overreacting. You weren't scared, you were confused. Your feelings are not met, they're edited. You're told what you should have felt, what the moment actually meant, what kind of person you should be in response. And if you protest, they double down. Why are you being so dramatic? You always twist things. This isn't subtle gaslighting. This is emotional steamrolling in plain sight. You're made to feel embarrassed for having the wrong emotional response to your own life. You begin to second guess not just your memory, but your emotional capacity. You start apologizing for your sensitivity. You bury your instincts. You reshape your story around their version just to keep the peace. Overt subjective rewriting hijacks your inner voice and replaces it with theirs. It teaches you to distrust your feelings and defer to their interpretation. And the more often it happens, the more you disconnect from your truth, not because it disappeared, but because it was overwritten so loudly, so confidently, that eventually you stopped reading your own version. Self-incrimination as ritual. Self-incrimination as ritual is a psychological manipulation technique that conditions you to confess, apologize, and expose your flaws, not to heal, but to control. It turns vulnerability into performance, repentance into routine. You are taught that loyalty is proven by how deeply you're willing to admit guilt, even when you've done nothing wrong, especially when you've done nothing wrong. It starts with a prompt, a group discussion, a partner asking, "What did you do to contribute to this?" A leader saying, "Let's own our mistakes." At first, it feels like growth, responsibility, but the standard only applies to you. They never confess, never apologize. Your honesty is weaponized. Your regret is noted, recorded, used. And if you hesitate to participate, if you resist the ritual, you're labeled defensive, untrustworthy, uncommitted. You learn to scan yourself constantly, to find faults even where none exist. You anticipate blame before it's assigned. You volunteer your guilt, hoping it will protect you, but it never does. It just deepens your submission. You're not just controlled through punishment, you're controlled through your own agreement with it. In cults, toxic relationships, manipulative workplaces, and ideological echo chambers, this ritual is sacred. You confess to prove you're evolving. You confess to maintain belonging. You confess because silence is framed as dishonesty. And eventually, you forget what innocence feels like. You start to believe the guilt is who you are. Because when confession becomes currency and shame becomes identity, the manipulator doesn't have to break you. You hand them the pieces, one admission at a time. Charismatic reframing of reality. Charismatic reframing of reality is a manipulation technique that cloaks distortion in charm. It doesn't force you to see the world differently, it makes you want to. Through magnetism, confidence, and emotional allure, the manipulator reshapes your perception until lies feel like wisdom and red flags look like revelations. They don't just tell you what to believe, they make you feel like you arrived there on your own. It begins with their presence, captivating, disarming, visionary. They speak with certainty, passion, conviction. They tell stories that stir emotion, reframe pain as growth, and twist abuse into transformation. When they wrong you, they don't apologize. They reframe. I pushed you because I saw your potential. It wasn't control, it was protection. The chaos was necessary. It woke you up. You find yourself nodding, not because the logic holds, but because the energy seduces. Doubt feels awkward in the glow of their confidence. This reframing creates a high, one that's emotional, spiritual, or even intellectual. You feel seen, elevated, initiated into a deeper understanding. But underneath the inspiration is a slow reprogramming. You start adopting their language, their metaphors, their version of right and wrong. You begin to question your old beliefs, not through evidence, but through their emotional storytelling. And anything that doesn't fit their narrative starts to feel outdated, ungrateful, or small. Charismatic reframing doesn't use facts to win. It uses emotional gravity. It pulls you in until resisting feels like betrayal, not of them, but of a version of yourself you no longer want to be. And in that shift, your reality is no longer yours. It's theirs, with your voice repeating it back. Emotional echo chambers. Emotional echo chambers are psychological traps that surround you with voices, emotions, and narratives that only reinforce one version of reality, theirs. It's not just about controlling what you think, it's about controlling what you feel, by making sure you're constantly flooded with agreement, validation, and shared intensity from those who already believe the same thing. Your doubts are silenced, not with arguments, but with overwhelming emotional pressure that says, everyone feels this way, so should you. It starts when you're drawn into a group, relationship, or belief system that promises clarity, belonging, purpose. You open up, you bond, you share pain, joy, rage, and it feels powerful, like home. But soon, something changes. You notice that only certain feelings are welcome. Anger is fine as long as it's aimed at the right target. Sadness is accepted as long as it fits the group's narrative. Doubt, questioning, nuance, those make the room go cold. So you adapt. You echo what others feel to stay connected. You post the right things. You mirror the outrage. And slowly, your inner emotional world is replaced with theirs. Their feelings become your compass. If you stray, the pushback isn't logical. It's emotional. Disapproval, silence, shame, and so you fall back in line. This manipulation thrives in cults, activist extremism, toxic friendships, online communities, and manipulative partnerships. It isolates you in a sea of agreement where the volume of shared emotion drowns out your quiet truths. And the longer you stay inside it, the harder it becomes to tell where their feelings end and yours ever began. Boundary invasion through confession forcing. Boundary invasion through confession forcing is a manipulation technique that disguises emotional violation as intimacy. It doesn't ask you to open up. It pressures you, pushes you, corners you with affection, silence, or guilt until you reveal more than you're ready to share, not to build closeness, but to hand over control. Your secrets become their currency, your wounds their leverage. It often begins with them oversharing first, too soon, too deep, too personal. It feels raw, vulnerable, real. You feel honored, trusted, and then comes the unspoken expectation, your turn. They start asking questions, soft at first, then more probing. Don't you trust me? I've told you everything. Why are you holding back? If you hesitate, they act wounded. They call you guarded, cold. The pressure mounts. Eventually, you give in. You reveal your shame, your past, your fears, the things you've hidden from the world. And in that moment, it feels like connection. But what you don't see is that every confession is being logged, stored, sharpened for later. Because later, when you try to set boundaries, when you start to pull away, they'll reach into that vault. You said you were broken. You told me what your father did. Remember when you cried about that? Your own vulnerability becomes a weapon against you. This tactic isn't about love. It's about disarmament. You aren't safe to reveal yourself. You're cornered into it. And by the time you realize your boundaries were never respected, your soul has already been laid bare in their hands. Compliance measurement. Compliance measurement is a subtle yet deeply invasive form of psychological manipulation that tracks your obedience, not through direct control, but by constantly monitoring how well you follow the rules, meet expectations, and prioritize their needs over your own. It turns your life into a silent test where your loyalty is always being scored and your worth is tied to your ability to comply. At first, it looks like structure. They ask for updates. They remind you of agreements. They keep mental ledgers of what you've done, what you've said, what you failed to follow through on. Did you remember what I said last time? Funny how you didn't check in today. I was just curious to see if you'd actually do it. These aren't questions. They're audits. And every answer you give is recorded and judged. You begin to feel watched, even when you're alone. Your behavior becomes anticipatory. You overthink every word, every delay, every gesture. You apologize before being asked. You fix problems before they're noticed. You try harder to be good, not because you believe you're wrong, but because you fear what it means to be seen as disobedient. This tactic thrives in toxic relationships, controlling family systems, and authoritarian workplaces. It's not about punishment. It's about performance anxiety. You're trained to believe that your value is conditional, that every moment is a test of whether you're worthy of approval, affection, or peace. And when your life becomes a series of unspoken evaluations, you stop asking what you want. You just ask, did I pass? Dogmatic rehearsal. Dogmatic rehearsal is a manipulation technique that programs belief through relentless repetition. Repetition so constant and emotionally charged that it overrides critical thinking and implants doctrine where dialogue should be. It doesn't ask you to understand, it asks you to repeat, to memorize, to chant, to echo, until you're not just believing, you're reciting. It begins with slogans, mantras, affirmations, short phrases packed with absolute truth. We never question the mission. This is the only path. They are the enemy. These words are repeated daily, in meetings, prayers, conversations, even silence. You're encouraged to say them out loud, write them down, internalize them. It feels powerful at first, like belonging, like clarity. But the repetition isn't for clarity, it's for saturation. The more you say something, the more your brain accepts it as truth. Even if it once felt strange or extreme, it begins to feel familiar. And what's familiar starts to feel safe. Eventually, you stop thinking about what the words mean. You only know how they feel. Comforting, certain, righteous. Over time, any deviation from the script feels dangerous. Doubt becomes disloyalty. Silence becomes suspicion. You learn the correct answers. You quote the leaders. You rehearse the rules not because you understand them, but because you've been conditioned to. And when others question them, you feel anger, not curiosity. Dogmatic rehearsal doesn't just control your speech, it rewires your belief. You become a vessel for someone else's ideology, pouring it into the world without ever pausing to ask, do I still believe this, or have I just said it too many times to stop? Loyalty testing through dissonance. Loyalty testing through dissonance is a psychological manipulation that deliberately creates conflict between your values and your loyalty, then watches which one you betray. It forces you to choose between your conscience and your connection, between what feels right and the person demanding your allegiance. The manipulator doesn't ask for blind loyalty up front. They test it, subtly, repeatedly, until you prove that your need to belong is stronger than your need to be true to yourself. It begins with something small, a lie you're asked to accept, a rule you're told not to question, a moment when someone is treated unfairly and you're expected to stay silent. Your body reacts, something feels wrong, but the manipulator is watching. Will you speak up? Will you flinch? Will you leave? If you do, you're punished, emotionally, socially, or silently. If you don't, you're praised, welcomed, rewarded. Each time you stay quiet, your discomfort deepens, and so does their control. They escalate the dissonance slowly. More contradictions, more red flags, more tests. You become entangled in the fear that if you push back, you'll be cast out, labeled disloyal, betrayer, problem. So you compromise again, you suppress the unease, you rationalize, and eventually the gap between your values and your actions becomes so wide that the only way to cope is to numb one or erase the other. This tactic thrives in cults, abusive relationships, radicalized groups, and high-control institutions. It's not about creating belief. It's about creating obedience in spite of belief. And by the time you've passed enough tests, you don't even remember what you used to stand for, only who you were terrified of disappointing. Algorithmic bubble reinforcement. Algorithmic bubble reinforcement is a modern manipulation technique that quietly reshapes your worldview by surrounding you with content that echoes your existing beliefs, fears, and preferences until you mistake repetition for truth. It's not done by a person, but by a system, a digital ecosystem that studies your clicks, pauses, likes, and scrolls, then feeds you more of what keeps you engaged, regardless of whether it's healthy, true, or real. It starts innocently. You watch one video, read one article, like one post. The algorithm notices. It responds, not neutrally, but strategically. It begins showing you more of the same. Similar language, similar tone, similar biases. Soon, your entire feed feels like validation. Every voice agrees with you. Every message confirms your suspicions. Contradictory views vanish, not by censorship, but by silence. And that silence is the trap, because when all you see is agreement, you begin to believe dissent no longer exists, or that it must be wrong, dangerous, even evil. Your views become sharper, more extreme. Your emotions, fear, anger, righteousness are fed daily. The bubble grows thick, and because it feels so consistent, so loud, so everywhere, you stop questioning it. Why would you? Everything you see confirms you're right. But algorithmic reinforcement doesn't exist to enlighten. It exists to addict. It rewards engagement, not truth. It polarizes not by force, but by comfort. And the more you stay inside the bubble, the harder it becomes to hear yourself think, because your thoughts no longer echo from within. They echo from a system designed to shape them, and you never even noticed it closing in. Forced identity adoption. Forced identity adoption is a psychological manipulation that replaces who you are with who they need you to be. It's not about helping you grow. It's about reshaping you into a version that serves their narrative, their image, their control. Bit by bit, they rewrite your personality, your beliefs, your behavior, until you no longer recognize the person in the mirror. You don't evolve, you disappear. It begins with subtle framing. You're not really like that. People like us don't do that. That's just not who you are anymore. At first, it feels like insight, maybe even love. They seem to understand you better than you understand yourself. But slowly, your real preferences are dismissed. Your boundaries are reframed as selfish. Your passions are mocked, minimized, or replaced with theirs. You're praised when you comply, shamed when you resist. And eventually, resistance feels too heavy to carry. You start to adopt their language, their priorities, their identity markers, because it feels easier, safer, more accepted. They don't need to control every move. They've conditioned you to control yourself. You stop wearing what you like. You suppress your opinions. You avoid the things you used to love. And when the world compliments the new you, it stings, because no one realizes that version of you is a mask. This tactic is used in toxic relationships, high-control religious groups, extremist movements, and codependent family systems. It doesn't just demand loyalty, it demands transformation. And what's terrifying is that, over time, you forget what was taken. You stop asking what you want, because your identity has been replaced by an echo of someone else's expectations, spoken in your own voice. Rewarding inauthentic behavior. Rewarding inauthentic behavior is a psychological manipulation that teaches you to betray your true self in exchange for approval, safety, or love. It conditions you to wear masks, to be who they want, not who you are. And over time, the line between the performance and the person begins to blur. You stop expressing, you start editing, you abandon your truth because you've been taught that honesty costs too much and pretending pays better. It begins subtly. You speak your mind, they grow distant. You show vulnerability, they mock or minimize it. But when you say what they want to hear, when you mirror their beliefs, when you keep things light and agreeable, they reward you. A smile, a compliment, a warm hand on your back. You learn quickly, authenticity is risky, but adaptation is safe. So you adjust. You soften your opinions. You laugh at what doesn't feel funny. You hide your sadness, your anger, your brilliance. You become likable, predictable, contained, and they love you for it. Not because of who you are, but because of who you've learned to be around them. This manipulation thrives in toxic families, romantic relationships, corporate environments, and social systems that demand conformity. The damage runs deep, not because you're being punished, but because you're being praised for disappearing. You lose yourself in their approval, and one day you look in the mirror and can't tell if the reflection is real or just another version of you that learned how to survive. Because when pretending is applauded and authenticity is ignored, you stop asking, what feels true, and start asking, what will keep them close? Cognitive narrowing via threat. Cognitive narrowing via threat is a psychological manipulation that traps your mind in survival mode, forcing you to think small, react fast, and obey blindly. It weaponizes fear, real or implied, to collapse your awareness into a tunnel. In that tunnel, you stop thinking creatively, critically, or independently. You focus only on one thing, staying safe. And in that state, you're easy to guide, easy to bend, easy to control. The manipulator doesn't always yell. Sometimes the threat is a look, a withdrawal, a what if. If you leave, you'll have nothing. If you tell anyone, it'll get worse. If you mess this up, you'll lose everything. These threats don't need to be physical. They can be emotional, social, financial, existential. And once your nervous system feels danger, your mind contracts. It's how we're built to survive. But in that survival state, something else happens. You stop questioning. You don't wonder if they're lying. You don't analyze the pattern. You focus on compliance. The world shrinks to the size of the threat, and everything else, your future, your values, your truth, goes blurry. You follow the rules not because they make sense, but because they're the only thing keeping you from collapse. This manipulation thrives in abusive relationships, high-stakes workplaces, cults, and authoritarian systems. It doesn't demand your loyalty outright. It scares your brain into tunnel vision until there's no room for rebellion. And the longer you live under threat, the more natural it feels to think small, until one day the threat is gone, but the tunnel remains, and you no longer remember how to think beyond it. De-individuation through uniformity. De-individuation through uniformity is a psychological manipulation that strips you of your identity by dissolving it into the group. It doesn't erase you with violence. It dissolves you in sameness. It teaches you that to belong, to be accepted, to be safe, you must look the same, think the same, act the same. Over time, your uniqueness stops feeling like power and starts feeling like danger. It starts with rules, spoken or unspoken, dress codes, language cues, behavioral expectations. At first, it feels like unity, a shared culture, a tribe, but then you notice what happens when someone breaks formation. A judgmental glance, a joke that cuts deep, a cold silence. You take note, you adapt, you become quieter, softer, more agreeable, not because you've changed, but because standing out suddenly feels like standing alone. As the uniformity deepens, your individuality thins. You adopt group slogans, rehearse group values, internalize group fears. Your voice starts to sound like theirs. You mirror their tone. You absorb their emotions. And when you finally have a thought that's truly yours, you hesitate. You feel the pressure of the hive pressing down on your chest, reminding you, don't disrupt the harmony. This manipulation thrives in cults, extremist movements, toxic corporate cultures, and rigid social hierarchies. It doesn't chain you, it blends you. It feeds you belonging at the cost of selfhood. And soon you no longer ask, what do I believe? You ask, what will keep me from being noticed? Because in a world where visibility means vulnerability, becoming invisible starts to feel like survival. Shifting norms without consent. Shifting norms without consent is a psychological manipulation that subtly changes the rules of the relationship, the group, or the environment without warning, without agreement, and without acknowledging the shift. It's not just moving the goalposts, it's pretending they were never somewhere else. What was once acceptable becomes shameful. What was once optional becomes expected. You're told you've changed, that you're slipping, when in reality, the ground beneath you has been rewritten. It starts slowly. A request becomes a demand. A boundary you set is now selfish. A behavior once praised is suddenly criticized. The language changes, the tone hardens, the expectations rise. But when you point it out, when you ask why, they deny it. Nothing's changed, you're just overreacting. You feel disoriented, even crazy. You double back, re-examine your memory, question your judgment. But the change did happen. It just happened in silence. The manipulator counts on your confusion, because when you can't track the rules, you become desperate to follow them. You give more, try harder, shrink smaller, hoping to meet a standard that's always just out of reach. You become compliant, not because you agree, but because you're afraid of failing a game that no longer makes sense. This tactic thrives in toxic relationships, controlling group dynamics, exploitative work cultures, and ideological indoctrination. It erodes your trust in your own perception. It forces you to adapt again and again until you forget what your original limits were. And once you've adjusted enough times, you stop fighting the change because you no longer remember what you were fighting for. Mimetic desire, amplification. Mimetic desire, amplification is a psychological manipulation that doesn't create desire. It mirrors it, multiplies it, and then uses it to control you. It hijacks your natural tendency to want what others want, need what others chase, love what others praise. You don't desire the thing because it's right for you. You desire it because you've been shown that everyone else does, that if you don't, you're behind, you're missing out, you're less. It begins with a signal. Someone powerful, admired, or close to you wants something, a lifestyle, a belief, a relationship, a role. Suddenly, others follow. The want spreads silently. You start to feel the pull too, even if you didn't care about it before. It might be a promotion you never needed, a doctrine you never questioned, a partner you weren't drawn to until someone else was. The manipulator fans the flame, creating envy, scarcity, comparison. You're shown images, status, praise. You're asked, don't you want that too? Soon, your internal compass begins to spin. You confuse imitation for passion. You work harder for goals that weren't yours. You chase validation dressed as vision. And the more people who desire the thing, the more irresistible it becomes. It's no longer about the object. It's about not being the one left without it. This technique thrives in social hierarchies, manipulative marketing, cult dynamics, and toxic peer circles. It doesn't force you to conform. It seduces you into it. By amplifying desire around you, the manipulator steers your path from the shadows. And by the time you get what you thought you wanted, it's already too late. You've given them the power to define your hunger. Conditioned dissent, aversion. Conditioned dissent aversion is a manipulation technique that wires you to fear disagreement, not just with others, but with the system, the group, or the manipulator themselves. It teaches you that speaking up is dangerous, uncomfortable, or shameful. Over time, the very idea of voicing dissent creates a physical and emotional response: anxiety, guilt, isolation. Not because your thoughts are wrong, but because you've been trained to feel that having them is. It doesn't start with punishment. It starts with subtle withdrawal. A cold look when you question something, a change in tone, a shift in the room. People stop responding to your messages. You're not punished. You're excluded, labeled difficult, negative, not a team player. You learn that harmony equals acceptance and resistance equals exile. So you adjust. You keep your opinions quiet. You nod when you want to challenge. You water down your truth until it fits the room. And when someone else dares to speak out, you flinch. Not at what they said, but at what might happen to them. You feel the fear in your own body, and that fear keeps you silent. This manipulation is especially common in ideological groups, toxic families, corporate environments, and high-control relationships. It makes compliance feel like safety and silence feel like virtue. And the longer you suppress your voice, the more foreign it feels to use it, until eventually you stop noticing when you disagree at all. Not because your beliefs have changed, but because your nervous system has learned that dissent is not an option.